Good evening. Thank you for the patience. I know some of you braved the evening Bangalore traffic, the afternoon Bangalore traffic, so thank you for coming. I'm sure the room is going to fill up as we progress. With that said, as some of you made it on time, we won't keep you waiting. My name is Aditya, co-founder of Accorian. Accorian is a 6.5-year cybersecurity strategy, testing, compliance, and audit firm. We're HQ'd out of New Jersey with a primary delivery center not too far from here in Bangalore, close to Indranagar. On my side, there are a couple of folks who will be speaking today. Okay. Thanks, Sean.
Technology escapes it.
Yes. Supposed to be a tech. Alright, so primarily Sean, who runs all of High Trust Services, will be speaking to you folks today. This has to be an interactive session, else it's going to seem like a monologue where we're just going to be presenting what High Trust, why is it important, why is it, how do you circumvent it, how do you achieve this certification. Along with Sean, two other folks on the team, Adarsh and Sushil, a big part of the team, will also be speaking. The intention of today's session is to give you an introduction about what is High Trust, why is it important, and how do you achieve this massive feat. As the title says, High Trust is extremely important for companies today that have a US go-to-market strategy, for the simple reason that if you work in US health or your clients are US health companies or health techs, by virtue of getting exposure to electronic health record, you have to start complying with, of course, HIPAA. But HIPAA, as you know, is not a certifiable standard. I can literally state that, hey, I'm HIPAA compliant and I can get on with it. Which is why the High Trust Consortium was formed a couple of years, over a decade ago, so that by insurance companies, so that there is a way to validate and create a benchmark in health data security. Today, I want to say that it is the gold standard in health data security, and it's a lot of work to achieve. Accorian is one of the top 5 companies in the world that, in terms of volume of number of High Trust assessments done, we're the only ones doing it in this part of the world. So a little bit about Sean's background, 35 years in technology and security. I can introduce him. And ex-US Marine Corps, has a lot of experience in the Fed space, a lot of state experience, moved into health IT, and then health data security. He's been doing High Trust long before I knew what High Trust was, which was over 10 years ago. My name's Aditya, like I said, 15 years in cybersecurity. I'm a one-trick pony, I only know security. And I used to be a pen tester, did a little bit of GRC, got the bug of growing out a business, and then, Raymond and I started Accorian 6.5 years ago. So today, this is the agenda. There are a bunch of things that we're going to talk about. Who's Accorian, of course. We're going to talk about that. We'll, of course, talk about why is security important, why is High Trust important, talk about some case studies. We'll talk about the entire process of how does one go about the High Trust achievement process, and then at the end of the day, at the end, we'll talk about High Trust AI services, GoReco, and then open it up for questions. So I'm going to open up a slide that most of you who are security practitioners can relate with, which is the talk of the town. It's 2025, so all we're talking about is the latest data breaches. Some of them are third-party associated with them. Some of them are insider threats. Some of them are supply chain attacks. Some of them are stealing IPR. All of these various blocks represent the true security landscape that all of us are dealing with on a shoestring budget, with limited resources, with limited technology tools, and with inadequate processes, right? So for the mere fact that we're all able to achieve this is a massive feat in its own self. I'm going to talk about Accorian real quick. So like I said, we do strategy, we do compliance, we do testing, and we do audit. Accorian is actually one of 10 companies that all have all of these credentials in-house. On the strategy front, everything from writing up a security strategy, the CISO, compliance services, the likes of them, DPRM, a lot of architecture reviews. On the offense side, we're doing a lot of pen testing across cloud API, application, mobile, network, the likes of them. We're doing a ton of AI security, pen testing, of course. And on the compliance side, you can see the number of abbreviations. basically every alphabet in the security compliance soup represented on the slide here. Everything from high trust, HIPAA, the various ISOs, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, CMMC, FedRAMP, and the likes, and of course privacy. About 175 of us at Accorian today, more than 750 compliance assessments and audits completed, out of which 300 successful high trust assessments over the last 6 years. We're one of 10 companies that have all of the credentials of being a high trust assessor, a SOC assessor, PCI QSA, a PCI ASB, CREST accredited, CMMC readiness partner, and the likes of them. I felt like I was doing the song Breathless from, I forgot the person who sang it, but yeah, similar. Over 25,000 vulnerabilities detected through 1,500 pen tests. We've created our own Gorico or a GRC solution in-house, and then we have teams across the world. So before I hand it off to Sean, I want to quickly talk about what's new at Accorian, because some of you folks have been attending these sessions year after year, but it's very important to share what's the last 1 year been, right? I'm going to start with the first one, which is AI security. I don't have to sell you on AI, I don't have to sell you on AI security, because everybody's thinking through it, whether it's strategy, testing, audit, so we do it all, where we're helping companies figure this out. Accorian about a few months ago became a CMMC RPO, which is we're helping a lot of companies through readiness. CMMC is making a rebirth and a re-evolution with its rise. So we're seeing a lot of companies that we work with pick up CMMC, and we're working with a lot of them. We're doing a lot of platform-led solutioning, right, which is helping startups achieve SOC 2, ISO, PCI, HIPAA through our platform Gorico in a way that you can follow a DIY approach, or do-it-yourself approach for creating your policies, figuring out your gaps, figuring out your risks, and then going ahead and starting with the implementation process. This has been tremendously popular as a service for startups, and of course combating the huge market that SOC 2 has created for startups. We're doing a lot of managed TPRM. As you're aware, your weakest link is your third party, because as a company you can be doing all the right things, but you could very well have vulnerabilities or risks due to your third parties, and that's what we saw, whether it's Qantas, whether it's Coinbase, whether it's Infosys. We've seen all of these cases in the last couple of weeks. We're doing a ton of AI chatbot pen testing, and that's a very, very popular service. As companies started to strap on a AI chatbot, access control issues, authentication issues, authorization issues, massive, right? And that's why we're doing a ton of pen testing and giving a lot of value to customers. We're doing a lot of product security as a service, where we're looking at products as a suite and not a standalone application. So the underlying infrastructure, the underlying API, the mobile side of it, the network side of it, and looking at the entire DevOps and securing it so that you have a DevSecOps program. So we're doing a lot of this for larger customers of ours. We're doing a ton of consolidated audits. As you can imagine, GRC is like tools sprawl. There's so many of these various certifications. You can't be doing a SOC 2 in January and then ISO in March with a similar set of evidences. So we're working with a lot of customers to consolidate their audit cycles, wherein you do a superset of evidence and you comply across various standards, and we come in and do one holistic large audit across high trust SOC, ISO, PCI, and the likes of them. And then lastly, we're doing a ton of maturity assessments. And there's a phrase which is, it's very hard to showcase return on security investment before breach happens. But in a lot of cases, we're helping CISOs, VPs of security, heads of security, showcase what a return on investment for security is, how do you calculate it through maturity assessments and doing benchmarking. So these are some of the popular services that we've been doing the last 1 year, and this has got a lot of traction with some of our larger and mid-sized customers. Right? With that said, I'm going to hand it off to Sean. I'm done with my spiel, but Sean's going to take over. He's going to talk about high trust and everything that you need to know to achieve high trust. So over to you.
Thank you. So the funny thing is, I think I stood here about 18 months ago in this exact room telling all you guys, you got to get high trust. You need to do it. Many very familiar faces I've seen. The good news is you still have to do it. The bad news is you still got to do it. The really bad news is it's gotten harder since the last time I stood up here and talked to you guys about it. And what I mean by it got harder, they've gotten more detail oriented. I'm going to go through a lot of that today. We'll talk through, for those that are new to it, what do you have to do to get there? We're going to start off with what it is, so I'll give you a little bit of a high trust 101. But a lot of today, as Addie said, it's going to be interactive. We will have question and answers at the end. If you've got something that's burning, it's something I'm talking about or something one of the other guys are talking about, just go ahead and feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. It's a lot of information, and I don't want you sitting here waiting an hour and a half to ask questions. So, for those who don't know, what is high trust? High trust essentially is the golden standard for, is that me clicking? It's the golden standard for healthcare data, for protecting healthcare data. The great thing about it is it's not just for healthcare data. And we'll talk more about that in a little while too. But historically, high trust started with being able to secure PHI, PII information. And they made their claim to fame with it. They've cornered the market with it, and they've done a great job with it. It is the gold standard. It is what you should be doing. If you have healthcare data, any type of protected data, you should be looking at implementing high trust in your organization. But we're actually coming up on almost 20 years to 2027 will be the 20th anniversary of high trust. I'm getting the clicking. We'll see what great, wonderful things they come out with. I already have insight into what's going to happen here coming in next year, so going to be a lot more changes than even more what we're talking about. But 20 years of high trust, trying to get organizations to just follow baseline security controls. And that's really what it is at the end of the day. And what we try to make sure everybody understands is that it's complicated, it's hard, but you have to do it. There's really no other way around it. If you're not securing your infrastructure, you're not securing your data, you're just asking for trouble. It's gonna blow up. And a lot of you guys have probably lived through some of this here, probably since the last time I stood up here and said, hey, you gotta do this. I know, what are we saying? Probably, I think the last metric was about every one in that third day, somebody's getting breached in the healthcare realm. That's not even the rest of the world, that's just healthcare. So don't think that you're immune to it, don't think it's not gonna happen to you, it's going to. But, so high trust itself, they created the CSF. The CSF is, really the answer to how to protect yourself. And one of the great things that they try to do, and they do it very well, is create a framework that is adaptable to the environment that you're in. It's the only framework out there that allows you to do custom scoping, which we're going to talk about in a little while. It pulls in all these authoritative sources. So it's not just them going out and making up their own controls. They're looking at SOC, ISO, they're looking at GDPR, they're looking at HIPAA, they're looking at Fed and state requirements, they're looking at, pretty much, I think we're over 60 authoritative sources now. We'll show that here too. It's the only one out there that's pulling from all these different sources, and it's also threat adaptive. And what I mean by that is they're updating right now probably monthly the framework based on the threats that we're seeing out there. So depending on what's happening in the world, we're getting updates to the CSF at least monthly right now. So and again, it's the only framework that's doing that. They've done thousands and thousands and thousands of assessments. So the great thing is they're learning from that, and we'll talk about some of the new things that are coming out, some of the changes that they put out there, and I'll even give you guys a little insight in some of the new stuff that's going to be coming in the version 12 sometime at the end of this year. And then they're updating, the tools and how you use the framework itself and how you get into it. So As I said, it maps to over 60 authoritative sources, applies to any industry. And this is probably one of the hardest things organizations have to understand because HITRUST spent such a long time and a lot of money and effort to corner the healthcare market. Then you start looking at it, and basically it comes down to one thing: replace PHI, PII with protected. If it's protected, sensitive information, they can do it. You can use the framework to cover it. A lot of time that people don't understand things about the differences. They say, well, I'm SOC 2 or I've got an ISO. Well, that's great and wonderful, but HITRUST scales to your organization. So depending on how big you are, where you're located, how many facilities you have, how many locations you have, how many people you have in your organization, you can build your security program and scale it to your needs. So a lot of, you'll see this, and I love making the comparison with SOC 2 is because everybody gets into a SOC 2 and you look at your TSCs, you're like, okay, which out of the 5 of them, which ones don't I have to do? So let's go ahead and cut out 1, 2, 3 of them. Then you look at it and you say, okay, out of the controls I have left, which ones can I cut out of that? I don't have to do that. I don't want to talk about that. We don't do this. That's all right. We can get away with this. I just need a report. HITRUST won't let you do that. If you're not doing it and the control says you have to do it, you're going to get a 0 on it, and it's going to be reported that you're not doing it. So that's a lot of what we want to make sure organizations understand when you're going here. It's not a selective framework. Okay, it's a required framework. It's designed by security professionals. I spend a lot of time myself, and 2 other directors on my team are actually part of the External Assessor Council, and we actually interact with them quite a bit, where we meet, they'll query us on what are we seeing, what are our clients seeing with their assessments, what are our clients seeing from a security perspective, how do we improve the framework, how do we improve the process to get there. And we've become very active in that in probably the last year and a half because with all the changes that have been happening in the world. Myself and one of my directors, Stephanie, we helped author probably about 28 out of the 44 AI security controls that are now part of the security framework, the security certification framework for HITRUST. We are currently working on directly with what the scoping factors are going to be with the new version 12. There's going to be a lot of changes with that, and we're seeing that a lot of controls need to be modernized. So we are currently working with HITRUST on, okay, that's not how the industry works anymore. We can't do this anymore. So we're going in and saying, let's reword this or let's fix this. We're seeing less and less on-prem, we're seeing more cloud. Let's make the adjustment with what the controls are requiring to make sure that everybody understands, what we're asking for in the control set. And then, like I said, managed and maintained by HITRUST. The only framework right now that is going through almost a perpetual update cycle. And it's almost a little frustrating how often they're updating it, because we're just starting to get in the swing of things, and next thing you know, there's a new subset coming out or something we have to go back and we got to take a look at. I think the last one they just came out with, they hit another 6 authoritative sources and added probably another 80 new controls, to the overall set. And again, it's very specific or selective depending on if you have to actually have those controls in your assessment. But it's nice to have it there. Okay, if I'm looking at a specific like a MARZ thing, and not many people do that unless you're working in the Fed, U.S. Fed space, the controls are there. So you can just add that in and go through it. You don't have to go searching, through the internet and asking chat, GPT, okay, what are the control sets in MARZ? And hope you get the right ones. So, went the wrong way. So this is just a highlight of the, I won't go through all these, but the 60 authoritative sources just gives you an idea what all is included in this. And the great thing about HITRUST, and we'll talk about complexity of the controls. If you guys have never done HITRUST before, the controls are completely different than anything that you have seen in SOC, ISO, or any of the other standards. But they're very detail oriented. And the reason they are is because they want to make sure that you're following processes that can cover you in all these other areas. So in most cases, if you're doing a high trust, say, you know, the big one, you do an R2, and you've scoped it correctly, there's a really good chance 95% of that assessment will cover your SOC 2 Type 2. You know, almost, I think we're almost to 100% on an ISO. You know, and it's just that level of detail. It's so much more detailed than what you would see in these other frameworks. So, you know, there's a lot of coverage with this stuff here. If you add in these different frameworks or these different, you know, factors, you know, for these different areas, you'll get a lot more coverage. You'll get a lot more mileage out of your certification. Okay, what's the big deal? How can it help? Big thing is table stakes. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, you know, everybody loves a badge. Look what I did, you know, pat myself on the back. But if you go through this process and you're following the program, it will keep you safe. It's not perfect, but it will keep you safe. You're going to, you know, narrow down where your vulnerabilities in your organization are gonna be. It's like I said, it's not perfect. It's not going to cover everything. Everybody knows what our biggest problem is. Security is, right? End users. So we can control everything technical. We can write reports, run scans. We can do all the great things out there. We can't control the people that are actually accessing it. We try, but you put the protocols in place. You make sure you're training. You make sure you have proper policy and procedure, and you have, you know, checks that you're running to make sure they're out there. And you got good incident response plans, and you got BCDR, you know, plans and things like that. So if you're able to follow all this, the table stakes for this are great because the optics on high trust are huge with healthcare organizations. In many cases now, and you'll see this a lot, where it's in the RFPs now. You know, they're going to say you have to be high trust R2 certified. You know, especially if you're dealing, you know, with larger organizations in U.S. healthcare. We know we deal with it with UHC. We know most of the blues and stuff like that have it written in their RFPs, and they're down to the specific level that they are requiring you to be certified in. And if you're not, you go on the other pile that you want to be in. So, recognize the gold standard. I mentioned that earlier. You know, there's really nobody else out there coming close to what high trust is doing in the healthcare world. Talk about reducing the risk of cyber attacks and data protection. Really, at the end of the day, you know, you've got to have some kind of framework. You've got to, as security professionals, you've got to have somewhere to stand. And this is it. You know, it costs a lot. It takes a lot to put in there. The last thing you want to have happen is somebody not following the rules and it blows up on you. So you want to make sure that, you know, everybody's buying in with it. You know, your organization is understanding the value of having this, you know, and it works. And then the other thing is shorter future audits. Who's done high trust before? Oh, good. Oh, got one. That's right. You have done it before. This is, I want to call it a misnomer, but it can be misleading. Because, as I said before, the great thing about it is you can combine a lot of your audits. So it will make things like, you know, figuring out your audits, like, well, if you do high trust and then you piggyback with the SOC 2 Type 2, it will make life a lot easier for you, you know, be able to cover that stuff, some of those other audits. The big problem that I get with this one here is, you know, because it changes all the time, it's threat adaptive, and it's prescriptive to the size of your organization, every time you have a change where you're growing in your organization, we got to go back and look at these controls, and you may have to add some more to it, and we got to do some other stuff. So I say that with a grain of salt, that it shortens future audits. It can and it does, but then it also broadens your sight and your insight into your organization, so your audits make it a little heavier from the high trust side. Okay. The different types of audits. You know, high trust, I guess about a little over 2 years ago, came out with 2 additional audits. It used to be the R2 was the big deal. That's all they ever had. So now we have the E1 and the I1. The E1 is basically, it's just a small routine hygiene type assessment. It's 44 controls, when in reality it covers probably, if you break it out the way with all these sub-elements in there, it's probably closer to about 280 controls. And what I mean by that is, and we'll talk more detail later, but if you're looking at a control that says organization must implement antivirus on all endpoints. That's your SOC 2 control, that's your ISO control, you see that out there. HITRUST comes back and says, oh yeah, by the way, you still got to have it on every endpoint, but I want to make sure data definition files are updated every 30 days. You can't bypass the scans. Scans must be run every 12 hours or on change, and then there's all these other things. So every control has a subset of controls that are part of it. So when we talk about the number of controls with an E1, it's 44 primary controls with a whole bunch of subs in it. Still a heavy lift, but again, you're thinking about it, if I'm going to do 44 controls, they better be 44 really good controls. And if I'm going to stand on that, they better cover my organization pretty well, and these do. The I1, it's kind of in a mid-level. It's 182 controls. It's not as much of a heavy lift with as the R2 is, but it's a little bit more intense. With the E1 and the I1, we're only looking at your implementation. You don't have to go through the whole policy and procedure development process. And again, I'll stand here and correct myself, but some of the controls require policy and procedure. The very first control in your E1 and your I1 says, does the organization have an ISMP in place? Well, that's a policy. So you got to make sure that, yeah, the implementation of it is you have to have it, and I'm validating that you actually have a information security management program documented, but that's a policy that you have to document, and probably some associated procedures with it. So you just gotta take it with a grain of salt that when they're talking about I'm only looking at implementation, we're not scoring you on that, but you still have some follow-up documentation that you will still meet this. You get more detail, like I said, incident response, BCDR plans, ultimately their policies to start with, and then turn into procedures. You're going to have some level of that covered for these other two. Then you have your R2, which is the big, that's the full one. It's based off of the scoping that your assessor does with you, based off your organization size, what you're doing, the environments, all that kind of stuff. And those factors I mentioned, this can be anywhere from, say, low 200s, 220-ish controls up to we just did several that were over 1,400 controls. And again, it really depends on your level of risk, who you're working with, what these factors are, and some of the other things that are added into it. Key things with HITRUST, they function off these 19 domains. These 19 domains cover pretty much everything within your security program, and then each domain has a subset of controls, and I don't want to call it an infinite number of controls, but there's an infinite number of combination of controls that can come up in here based off the scoping. One of the secrets that I'll let you in on is at the end of this year for version 12, we're going to add 2 more domains. We're adding 2 new privacy domains. So HITRUST is going to explode even further into a much bigger review. But we're seeing where with the current assessments, with the current framework, there is a lot of detail on privacy, but a lot of times, we kind of lose focus on privacy and we're looking more towards technical, where, here it's going to force us to look more at the privacy side of the house. All right, scoring. With the E1 and the I1, I said we only look at your implementation. So we're still using the standard HITRUST scoring rubric when we're going through it. The only difference is for an E1 and an I1, you must score an 82% or higher on each domain in order to pass. Where with the R2, they give you a little more leeway. You can rely heavily on the policy and procedure. You only need a 62% for each domain to pass. And what I mean by each domain is if you go back to that 19 domain piece, those scores that, those individual controls that roll up, you must score a collaborative score in each of those domains at a 82 or a 62, depending on which one you're looking at. For the R2, the weighted averages are kind of here at the bottom. Policies 15, procedures are 20. Implemented is 40. Very rarely, some organizations talk about this. We do have 2 additional maturity levels that we very rarely test an organization on, and that's measured and managed. And these are for organizations who have gone through the full HITRUST cycle several times, and you are getting more into a measured type approach with your organization. It's not about building new processes for the organization, but it's improving them. So, if you are maturing in your organization to that level, we will start looking at these additional levels. But in most cases, we're going to talk you out of it because it's just more controls, costs you more money, but it still doesn't give you an additional certification out of it. It just puts more emphasis on you following the more detailed rules. Shared responsibility. So this seems to be a little confusing for a lot of customers. HITRUST is working to make it a little more simpler, and they've been working with a lot of other organizations, third-party organizations, to make life a little bit easier. But simply put, if you are relying on a third-party organization to perform an activity or provide a service to your organization, and they're HITRUST certified, we can inherit from them. So you got AWS out there, they're handling all your, you got your entire S3 set up and they're handling all of your virtual machine configurations. Great. We don't have to test you on that. We can just go in there, we can put in a request saying, AWS is responsible for 90% of this. Your only responsibility is to make sure AWS is following the rules. So we'll go in there and we'll put in a request for 90% of the score to be inherited from their assessment into your assessment. And we can do this across the board with a lot of third parties. There's more and more third parties that are starting to do HITRUST. And we are starting to look at larger organizations that you're working with. So if you're relying, let's say you got a data exchange going with UHC, you're only responsible up to the point where you pass that off to them. So if the control says you got to do something, past that point, then we go in there and we say, okay, great, we can put UHC in and inherit from that specific control, and you'll get that score, and you don't have to get evidence or test on that side of it. So inheritance, they make it sound a big scary monster. It's really not that hard. The problem where it comes in is a lot of companies, a lot of organizations like to say, I have no responsibility in that area at all. I want 100% inheritance from that organization. I come back right with you going, you always have responsibility. If for no other reason, it's your responsibility to make sure your partner is following the SLA. So again, like I said, 10%, 5%, whatever it might be. In some cases, it may be 100%. You got an MSP out there who's running everything on your endpoints, and all you're doing is signing checks. Okay, we'll go 100% on it. But you need to really look at what that provider does for you. Look at what the control is asking for and say, okay, what responsibility do they have? What responsibility do I have? With the inheritance program, when you're looking at the key things I want to bring out here is just, if you're doing an E1, like I said, it's 44 controls. In most cases, if say you're a 100% AWS hosted app, you can probably inherit about 85% of the responsibility from AWS. So makes it a lot easier. For your I1, same sort of scenario, 75%, for your R2, 60%, and that's a perfect world. But say now all of a sudden I've got a split environment, I've got an on-prem where I've got multiple locations, and maybe I've got some of my stuff's in AWS, but I've got other stuff in IBM. We got to look and see what we can get from there. It may not be as easy as it looks. IBM is one of the ones that's not on the list right now. We're trying to get them to get on the list so we can get them part of the inheritance program. But if you're working in a IBM hosted environment, they are HITRUST certified, but they will not share their report with you. So that becomes problematic, because then how do you go test all the stuff they're responsible for? We have a way to get around it, but it's a little complicated. So the benefits of inheritance: reduces the need for duplicative and redundant direct controls. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Cuts down on what you have to test, evidence you've got to get. Identifies controls and mappings leveraged against assessment results within the systems. Provides a transparency and visibility, and the industry's only inheritance capability for third-party assurance, especially well-suited for shared cloud solutions. So the cool thing about this program is they're the only ones that does it. No other framework does anything like this, and it's expanding even further. So some of the things that we are going to roll out towards the end of the year are going to be the ability for you to start looking at, as a HITRUST customer, you're going to have a list of all service providers that are HITRUST certified. So say you're shopping for new providers, that's going to be something you could go take a look at. There's an index that you'll go take a look at. There's much more detailed breakdown inside of my CSF now that will give you a lot more detail about organizations and where they are in their high trust journeys. All right. This is a key thing here. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on GRC tools. Love GRC tools. Think they're wonderful. If you got the opportunity to implement a GRC tool and you think it's helpful, by all means go do it. Don't go into it believing the hype of what these vendors are selling. Right now, some of the bigger names are saying that they can automate you. Most of your assessment, you can get high trust certified in 3 months. For those who have lived in this high trust world, we have never gotten a single customer high trust certified in 3 months. Never happens, never will happen. GRC tools can help organize the effort to produce the evidence, to manage the processes that need to take place. They can also help you organize the evidence that needs to be collected. But high trust has such specific requirements around the evidence, most GRC tools can't follow that process, including ours. We'll throw GoRico out there. High trust requires now, as of last January, all evidence must be collected within the 90-day fieldwork period. Before, we used to be able to go, we had up to a year to collect evidence and we could put it out there. So GRC tools could kind of work. It kind of worked a lot like a SOC 2. We could go look at the evidence and pull it in. Can't do that anymore. Now it has to be done within the field, the 90-day audit period or fieldwork period. You have population files, which if you've ever done high trust, you know you've got to go, there's about, depending on the size of the assessment, anywhere from 25 to about 60 population files that we've got to get. We need to collect those in the fieldwork period. So I can't select your samples and tell you what samples that you need to go get evidence on until after you give me the population files in the fieldwork period. You can start seeing where that window just started collapsing. And now you can start seeing with the GRC tools really not going to help you a whole lot, because you would have to collect every single potential piece of evidence ever, put it in your tool in order for this to work effectively for you. That's ridiculous. There's no way you could ever do that. The automation, the APIs that are out there, with some of the bigger tools, they collect a lot of it. A lot of the cloud stuff they'll get some of that stuff, but they're not collecting all the stuff. And if anybody's ever done high trust, we've got to look at a lot of endpoint stuff. We got to look at configurations of servers and whips and WAPs and things like that. So there's no API tools going out there doing that kind of stuff. So like I said, don't buy into the hype of these big name GRC tools out there saying, hey, they're going to make your high trust journey easier, faster, more affordable, cheaper. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. But I'm not saying don't get the tools. We're actually partnered with several of these guys because the tools will help with that sustenance portion of it. You still have to have some way to make sure your organization's following all the rules. Do's and don'ts. Use your GRC tool to manage your policy ownerships and tracking. Prepare population files in advance so you can start doing that and then have it periodically refresh. Align frameworks in your GRC to high trust control mappings. This will help a lot, especially if you're doing multiple frameworks. So when we are looking at what evidence do I need for my SOC, what I need for my ISO, GDPR, or whatever it might be. Collaborate with your assessor. Hopefully that's us for everybody here. For those who have done this before with me, I drive this all the time. I'm not feeding you tonight, and you're not become my customer. Okay, so that's part of the rules here. But don't assume evidence automation will reduce your assessor's effort. We talked about it. It won't. Don't upload sample-based evidence prior to random selections. We have customers who have tried to do this. They try to dictate to us what the samples are going to be. Doesn't work that way. And it's actually it's violating the contract with High Trust that you won't allow us to select the samples and let us test what we want to test. Don't rely on continuous monitoring, on continuous control monitoring for high trust validation. And again, it's more of an effort kind of thing than anything else. And then don't assume HITRUST will accept always on evidence collection. Not yet. That being said, they are working towards a continuous monitoring assessment approach. We're probably, when I was there in April, then we were probably about 18 to 20 months out for prototyping on that. But there is a concept of continuous monitoring that is going to be rolled out in HITRUST. And it'll be helpful. Of course, it's HITRUST, so there'll be a price tag on that. And it'll probably be a little bit of a learning curve with it. I see pros and cons to it, but should be interesting. Should be interesting how they're going to pull this off. Okay. Couple more slides for me, and then I'm going to let the guys take over. HITRUST is the only threat adaptive framework. They are looking at stuff that's happening every moment of every day, and they're adjusting the framework accordingly. So every time we get these CVs come out, and somebody did this, somebody created a new worm that did that, somebody found another hole to go exploit something, HITRUST is looking at the control set and saying, okay, how could we prevent this? At a bare minimum, how could we at least identify it? And that's part of this too. It's not always prevention. Sometimes it's just identification. And then, what's the best, resolution for you guys going in and remediating what happened? So the big selling point here for HITRUST with the threat adaptive side is there are a significant number of not just people that work for HITRUST, but organizations like us that are constantly looking at what's happening in the world today. We're in constant contact with HITRUST, and we're updating the framework. The framework is getting changed frequently. All right, my last slide for now. Couple scare tactic things here. If you guys have sat through this before, I used to have this nice big, hey, your world's crumbling down around you slide. So this is, I kind of made it a little bit, less crumbling and more exploding. But 51% of breached organizations reported lasting reputation and branding damage. So the good news is, if you want to think of it from good news, is we've had so many breaches in the past 2 years, we have analytics coming out our ears. We're looking at, how bad was it? What happened? What happened to the organization? How well did the organization recover? Did the organization recover? In many cases, they didn't. Everybody, I can probably, I'm going to say one name of one organization, and you're all going to shake your head yes, going, yeah, I've heard of that. Change Health. You should have heard about it because it impacted probably about 4 billion people just in the US and Canada. And all their information was compromised. And it literally came off of something really stupid and simple that could have been prevented. And they were HITRUST certified. They just weren't following the program. They weren't enforcing, their endpoint rules and making sure that every, individual was following the do not click on the phishing email rules. But that, that's something everybody should pay attention to. So, there's costing in here. $4.45 million is the average cost of a breach today. And these are numbers I literally just updated a couple of weeks ago prepping for this. A 549% increase in ransomware attacks. Ransomware is now a business. Okay, it's accepted. The FBI and U.S. Department, DHS, have just said it's a business. Insurance companies are going to pay up to X number of dollars. The hackers know this. They're going to set it up. They're not going to keep the data forever because what they want to do is they want to come back in later and get more money from you. Or they want to go find one of your vendors or use you as a vendor to get into whoever your primes are. So it's just what's going to happen. It's the new way of the world. That's why we have such a huge increase. 70-88% of controls are inherited from major cloud service providers. We talked about that there. The great news there, again, is because we're getting more and more of these providers on board with it, it's making life a lot easier as you move into these cloud environments. And we're probably, I'd say probably right now, even with our customer base, probably about about 85% of them are either fully in the cloud or at least the majority of their systems are in the cloud. What do we got? 85% of leading cloud service providers align with high trust. That kind of goes hand in hand. So the next big one here is about 6 weeks ago, ESG did a whole case study on high trust, and I actually have it, and I can share it out with everybody. The big news came out of this, because it's always been hard for me to stand up here and talk to you guys and say, high trust isn't worth it. It's hard, it's expensive, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of time. ESG has a whole article written on a 464% ROI on implementing high trust into your organization. And they'll break down every last aspect of where you can see this. And this for me has been huge because, like I said, it's always been hard to stand up here and say, go spend the money, go put the effort into it, go do, you got to do it. And sometimes people listen, some people don't, because everybody's sitting there going, that's a lot of money. I mean, I can do a SOC and an ISO and it costs me half of what high trust costs. You're getting half the coverage too. But at least now what we have is we have the ability to have metrics that we can stand on. So when we're talking to your senior leadership, you're talking to your senior leadership about why you got to do this and why we have to implement these changes and why we got to follow these rules, we now have something to stand on. We now can come back and say, this is why we need to do this, because if you don't do this, we're going to get breached, it's going to cost you a lot of money, it's going to kill our reputation, and in many cases, it's going to kill the company. And now we got stuff to stand there with. So anyway, just a couple of notes here. Cybersecurity investments are projected to reach 223 billion globally by the end of this year. And I mean, that's a significant push. If you go back and look at it over, let's say, the last 5 years, we only saw probably like 8 to 10 million, 10 million jump each year. This time it's huge. And again, look where we are. We got AI who's basically, taking over everything right now. And over the past 6 months, the bad guys have learned how to use AI a lot better than we've learned how to use it. And it's just the way of the world. And again, back to what I said earlier about looking at the authoritative sources and how you want to run your program. The assess once, report many approach for high trust, it applies. It makes sense. It works. That's where we'll see some cost savings. Reduce the effort a little bit on your other standards. Improve your security footprint. And that's really, I think, where you'll see most of the ROI. Okay? All right. So next up, I'm going to give Shashil a chance here to come up, and he's going to talk through, how do you go through this process? How do you get certified? Be nice to him. He's not a good public speaker. He's scared to death. Don't make me come back up here. But anyway, Shashil.
For the nice introduction, John. I hope I'm audible to you guys.
Oh, we hear it.
So I think after this, you guys know that high trust is not an easy task, right? It's quite a lengthy process and it's quite difficult to achieve. But that is the reason we have defined the path to achieve this certification. Okay. So first thing, what can be high trust certified? So I think most of the folks you already have gone under the certification like SOC 2, PCI DSS or ISO, right? And then we say that our organization is PCI DSS certified, ISO certified or SOC 2 certified. But when we are going for the high trust certification, so as per the high trust do not certify organization, they certified implemented systems. Okay, and what that can be? So basically, these implemented systems are which is responsible, to process PHI or PII data, and those are nothing but the business unit departments, your application, and then facilities, network infrastructure. So basically, these information we feel under the platform, and when we want to sell to services, we sell under that platform. Roles and responsibilities. So so basically here are the three entities. One is the organization, basically nothing but the client. One is the high trust, and one is the external external assessor, which is Accorian. So first let's talk about the organization. First of all, that we need a dedicated support from the organization. Okay, we have multiple stages where your presence is required. Example, gap assessment, your validation testing. So when we are doing the gap assessment, and the time of gap assessment, we expect that subject matter expert or a person who have have an expertise over the high trust. Because unless and until we don't get their proper response, we will not able to understand their compliance, okay, or those control requirements, whether those are in line with high trust or not. Okay, another thing like they need to purchase subscription. Unless and until they don't purchase subscription, we cannot go ahead with the high trust, because the high trust is very confidential, and it's their proprietary rules. So unless and until we do not go for we do not offer the subscription, we won't be able to showcase, or we won't be able to go through those control requirements. And then next is high trust. So as we know, high trust control requirements, those are derived from the multiple authority sources like SOC 2, HIPAA, PCI DSS. Okay, so their main job is to review those authority sources and make sure when there are any changes, okay, or if new authority sources are available actually, so high trust can go ahead and derive their control requirement from these authority sources. This what makes them more competitive, more compatible, as well as they are making sure that it is as good as the other standards. If you see, high trust is like a mother of all certification. Whatever the controls you will see in the high trust, those are derived from these multiple authority sources. Next, maintain the high trust management tool, because when we are dealing with the high trust certification, we need to collect the evidences, we need to have a policy and procedure. We cannot, we cannot share directly these documents with us. All these documents, need to be uploaded over the MySystem tool, and as an assessor, we will access MySystem tool and we'll derive this information from the tool. So they are mainly responsible to maintain the high trust MySystem tool, because if it goes down, then we won't be able to access this information. Another responsibility is sending advisory. So high trust, basically they are evolving periodically, and then you will see multiple updates in a year, and all these changes they send with the help of advisory. So as a assessor team, we receive multiple advisory from the high trust. Okay, then we understand what are those changes, and when we understand these changes, and then we communicate these changes to our clients. Then external assessor. So external assessor, our job is to understand this control requirement. So when we are conducting gap assessment, we want to make sure that we understand this control requirement before we go and conduct those gap requirements, because they are very in depth, and that is the reason when customers go through this gap assessment, sometimes they will not understand what is the requirement talking about. They are not as simple as the other certification or other framework. So that is the reason, as an assessor, first we understand this control requirement, and again it depends. There are different types of assessment. One is E1, there is I1 and an R2. And again, in the R2 assessment, we don't know what controls can be populated, because it's purely depend upon what information you feed to MyCSF. Okay. Right. So Accorian's proven approach. So we try to divide this lengthy process into the multiple stage. First is the gap assessment, then is the roadmap, then there's a remediation support, then there is the incubation, and there is a validated assessment, and then there is a maintenance. So first, gap assessment. Usually it lasts for the 4 to 5 weeks. Okay, again, it depends on how large your organization is. So for an example, when we generate the assessment, especially in the R2, so based on your factors, MySystem tool automatically they will populate those control requirements. So sometimes your control requirements go beyond 300 or 400 control requirements. So in order to cover all these control requirements, we need to we need more time, so we can go through each and every control, and we can explain what that control requirement is and what evidence we are expecting. So let's start with the gap assessment. So first in the gap assessment, first we try to understand the scope at high level. Okay, we share questionnaire with our customer, then we get that information, we understand the scope at high level, and then when we go ahead with defining scope in the MyCSF tool, we request our client to fill all the information. Maybe it could be the organization information, what organization is doing at high level, then probably the number of employees, the number of transaction, and then there are some supplementary factors. For an example, the number of transaction, as I already covered, number of transaction, and then other compliances like HIPAA or any security related controls, or maybe other compliance like a PCI DSS. All these they can select if required. Yeah. Once this is done, then we develop the assessment. MyCSF tool, all those control requirements will be generated. And as a gap assessment, we walk them through each and every control requirement. At the same time, we expect their subject matters to be available. And when we go through this, we note their response. So when we walk through them with the control requirement, we understand whether that control is fully implemented or not. And based on that, we develop their gap report. So there are two types of gap assessment. One is a simple control walkthrough, where we walk them through each and every control, and we'll just note their verbal responses. And second is the extended gap assessment, where when we are on the call with the subject matter expert, we will request them to log into the respective system, and actually we will check for that particular configuration. So that gives us enough confidence to understand whether the particular control is implemented or not. Because here the gap assessment very key role, because if we miss here something and if we don't address at this level, it could reflect in your final assessment, or it could impact your certification. So that is the reason it's very important for us to all the necessary subject matter expert or the person who have a high trust expertise should be present there. Okay. So yeah, once the gap assessment is done, then we develop the gap report, and that gap report we share with the customer. So next phase is Accorian how Accorian can accelerate high trust feedback. So basically here we connect with our customer, usually on bi-weekly call. When the gap assessment report is shared with our customer, they need to go and remediate. But while remediating these gaps, sometimes customer need more understanding what that control requirement is, or what is that coverage, whether that control requirement is restricted to the in-scope environment, or whether we need to go beyond the high trust boundaries, and then we can also cover whole as an organization as a part of the scope, because there are certain control requirements where we need to go beyond the high trust boundaries. For an example, new hire. If there is a new hire, but sometimes organization will have small teams, or the environment may be small. Okay, so sometimes we will not have those new hires in the high trust environment. Okay, so in order to test such a control requirements, we can go beyond the high trust boundaries. So we can take some samples from the organization, which are not part of the high trust in scope environment, and then we can collect those evidences for those new hires. So yeah, and again, sometimes we notice that some technology or the tools are missing. Okay, and sometimes our customer, they require to understand how what is the right tool that can actually help them to implement those control requirements. So sometimes some factors are there, what type of assessment you are going for. For an example, if even there are very limited control, so even a basic tool, if we that will help them to suffice the control requirement. And here how we Accorian can make them understand and help them to pick the right tool. For an example, if a multi-factor authentication or maybe a SIM tool is missing, so we can understand what is the right tool. If they are, in terms of again the coverage of control requirement, maybe in terms of the revenue, cost, it always matters, right? And yeah, apart from this, on the policy and procedure, we also help our organization to develop their policy and procedure. So some we know most of the time that folks they are going for the first time and they are not aware about their policy and what controls, how to write those controls, right? So here Accorian they help them as a partner and they develop their policy and procedure because as we already move on to the version 11, right? There are evaluative elements. One control is broken into the multiple subset of sub controls, or we call it as evaluated elements. So while testing R2 assessment, there is three maturity level. One is policy, procedure, and then implemented. So policy, Sean has already gone through that slide where the policy has 15% of weightage, procedure has a 20% of weightage, and implemented has a 40% of weightage. Okay. So yeah, in order to achieve that 35%, as a Accorian, we can help to develop policy and procedure. And we also perform the security testing. There are some control requirements where we need to check for the compliance on their application testing or the network testing or internal VA or the external VA. So as a Accorian, we also provide these services to our client. Next is the incubation. So whenever we make any changes, okay, when we implement any new control, okay, something that we identified as a gap in the gap assessment. So what happens when we do those changes to our systems, okay, we need to make sure those changes are working as per, and those are also in accordance to your business requirement, and they're also covering the high trust control requirement. So what happens when we are making any changes, we immediately cannot go for the final audit. Okay, so as per the high trust, we need to stabilize this system for next 90 days. Here, in these 90 days, what we can do, we can collect the data. For an example, if we notice in the gap assessment, the change management work, the entire process was missing. What we can do, once the change management process is implemented, then we need to follow that process. Okay, for the next 90, we need to continue that process. And when we are doing this, we are generating the data. So this data, for an example, change ticket, when we are creating the change ticket for it, it could be for the new user, it could be for the patches, or it could be for the configuration changes. Over the 90 days, we will be collecting data, and this information will be used by SR and assessor. So we use this data to generate the population file. So we know there are two types of control. One is sample control, one is non-sample control. So for the sampling, we will be using this data, and that is the reason. To test this sample controls, high trust expect us to minimum test 90 days of data, and that is the reason this incubation comes in the picture. So sometimes some organization will, they're ready to go, directly to the final. In order to, test those control requirements, we bare minimum we need to have those, 90 days of data to be present. Okay. Usually this is, more, it makes more sense for the organization. Usually they are going for the, first time, because when they implement those controls from very scratch, they will have no data to test, right? And yeah, and then Accorian will select those samples. First they will share the population file, they will collect this information, then they will do the sampling. This sampling will be available in the final audit. So phase 3 validated assessment. In this phase, what we do usually, when we do the sampling, the sample control, the samples are not shared with the client. So since last April, High Trust has provided strict instruction that when we do the sampling, the sample has to be kept with our side. Once we are into the validation testing, once we are into the fieldwork period, those samples will be shared with the customer, because as per the new process, High Trust new guidelines, we should collect the evidences in the fieldwork period. So fieldwork period is nothing but the testing period, where customer is responsible to provide those policy and procedure, provide those evidences, and they should be uploaded over the MySystem tool. As an assessor firm, we will be retrieving this information, and we will be doing the testing, and then we will be submitting your assessment with the High Trust. Okay. In between, what we do when we review your evidences, and somewhere, as we know that bare minimum 63% we require, to clear each and every domain. Even if one domain is failing below 62, so our certification is going to get failed. So that is the reason, while doing the testing, if we notice one of the domain is getting failed, if it is falling somewhere in the 60s or even less than that, what we do, we connect with the subject matter expert, and again we try to collect those evidences. So we are trying to make sure that all our client, at least they will achieve 67 or 70, more than 70%. So even if in the future there is any pushback from the ITRAS, and if we need to downscore any of the control requirement, I think still we are clearing the certification. That is one of the reasons we have maintained the 100% successful ratio. This is the only organization in the world that we have maintained the 100% successful ratio. Yeah, we also have our internal QA team. So they are making sure all the necessary documents, those are uploaded and those are linked to their respective control requirement. Because HITRUST is getting, HITRUST QA is getting very stringent day by day. So even if there are any document is missing, or so they will not consider that evidence, because if we upload that evidence after the fieldwork period, doesn't matter whether that configuration is correct or no, whether that evidence is sufficient enough or no. We must upload that document within a fieldwork period, that is in the testing period. So this basic checks is getting done in one of our internal QA. Yeah, once this is done, when we get a green light from our internal QA, we will submit the assessment with the HITRUST. And HITRUST is responsible whether to judge you whether you are certified or no. So sometimes once the assessment is submitted with the HITRUST, we will receive some pushback from HITRUST. Okay, sometimes they believe the testing is not accurate. Some of the validated elements are missing. So as an assessor, what we do, usually we connect with if required, we can connect with the HITRUST QA team, or in the form of task, we share the necessary information, how that particular evidence is sufficient enough and how they are covering the evaluated elements. And if further action is required, then we will get in touch with the customer and will make sure that necessary information is those questions are addressed properly, and then those are sent back to the HITRUST QA. Okay, let's talk about the interim assessment. Okay, so when interim assessment is only applicable for those customers who are going for the R2 assessment. So we know it's HITRUST is a 2-year certification if we offer the R2 assessment. So what happens? It's very tedious and time-consuming process. So it is not feasible every time to repeat this process and go for the certification after every year. So here, what HITRUST has done, they have introduced the interim assessment. In the interim assessment, what they do, HITRUST will pick one sample control from each domain. Okay. And so as there are 19 domains, so there by default there will be a 19 controls. And apart from this, in your previous R2 assessment, if there were any gaps generated, so those gaps will be added to your interim assessment. So basically they want to understand that those controls are still intact, the organization is still following those control requirements, and their maturity level is adequate enough to maintain the certification. So to maintain this certification for 2 years, before the anniversary date, we need to get our interim assessment done. And we follow the same process. We collect these evidences, we collect those evidences, we collect those policy procedure with the help of MySystem tool. We test them, each maturity level policy procedure, and implement it. And at the same time, before submitting the assessment, we want to make sure there are no changes made to the in-scope environment. Okay, because there could be a major changes. For an example, change in the technology, change in the tool, or if we change the service provider in between, something was outsourced, now it has become in-house. Such changes are considered as a major changes that could actually impact your certification. So we also guide our customer, make sure they do not do any changes to their in-scope environment until they clear their interim assessment. So once your interim assessment is clear, I think after that you're good to make those changes because the next RDO certification is as good as your new certification. Yeah. So once we again we confirm the scope and we make sure there are no changes if everything is according to the book, we will be submitting the assessment with high trust. Yeah. So before we go and hand over to
We're gonna take a break. So,
can you take a break?
yeah.
Any questions so far? Yes.
Good. Take the mic.
Thank you so much. Regarding the domains itself, why still we are having the same domains keep continuing? Why aren't we coming up with the specific domain for threat management and malware analysis, for the applied hardware security around embedded systems, IoT, OT, around, because the data is getting set over there as well. Why not around specific explicit apart from data protection and privacy for data security itself, because of the increased amount of data, then around your not just password management but also on the tokens and your secrets management, because password management, I don't even know when passwords are last been audited, right? Because we have moved along and still we use the same verbiage at least. I understand the controls are getting covered, but I'm specifically asking why the explicit domains are not getting coined out when we have moved significantly from the landscape perspective in the technology space as well as the adversarial space. And then GenAI, I'm not even talking about it because otherwise it's going to be opening up the Pandora's box. So yeah, this is my first question.
All right.
And then there are many as well.
So I think the to answer the question about the domains is HITRUST's approach is that the domains cover the security footprint. The controls cover the specific areas that you need to go through. So if I'm sitting here and I'm looking at some of the examples you gave me, then I'm gonna sit there and say, well, access controls, I have that already taken care of. I don't need to expand out to another domain because I already have controls in network security or in data protection, or I have privacy, or I have access control that already cover it. That being said, like I said earlier, they are expanding the domains going into the 12 version. Right now they're looking at privacy because privacy seems to be a bigger concern. I do think at some point we'll take a look at things like Gen AI. We'll take a look at maybe there's some more specific infrastructure things that we should take a look at. And I don't know that we'll expand them, but I think maybe we change their nomenclature a little bit. Like networking, is it really networking anymore compared to what we used to do? It's not. If you think about it, we're kind of back to where we started back with the AS400s and mainframe. We're kind of back to, we got a master system and then we got a whole bunch of nodes sitting out here. So, networking may change into communications or something. I don't know. But those things are being considered. And again, a lot of it too, remember, there's a lot of technicality with the framework itself. So there's so much work goes into what controls fit into these domains and what's the commonality between that. Because not only do you have what we talk about here is the domain and the control, we also have a control reference, which is another categorization that falls in between there to where we can sit there and say, okay, let's really roll up all of any control that has anything to do with access controls in the entire assessment. Because we may have 20 or 30 inside the access control domain, but then I have maybe another 40 or 50 that are related to access controls that are part of networking, maybe part of configuration or something along those lines. So.
No, the reason why I asked that question is because let's say suppose even if I go through the data protection privacy part, right? It might be covering your cryptography, but then at the end, if my privacy compliance is very much likely up to the mark, and if my PKI management is not up to the place, or probably my key rotation is not up to the place, or session management and your secret tokens are not up to the place, I will still get away with it, getting the 62%, and I will be up right there. So that's
not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Not necessarily,
Yeah.
but hypothetically.
Hypothetically, yes, but you also got to remember too that Yeah, just because it's not covered there, it is covered probably in another domain, because like say take tokens for specific, there. If you say you have hardware tokens in your scoping, we already have like about 15 controls that are going to show up across networking, across access controls, configuration management. I think there's a couple there too. So again, it depends on really what we say in that scoping and where, what controls are going to be assigned to your organization. Yeah, could they be categorized a little bit better? They could be. And a lot of times what we do when we're writing policy and procedures for organizations, we don't want to categorize them by the domains. I want to categorize them by the control reference. Because I have like 160 control references or something. It makes more sense because then I can drill it down a little bit easier, and then I can sit there and sort my policies and my requirements according to what they specifically work with. So if I'm looking at, bringing a SME in, it's easy enough for me to sit there and say, okay, this network engineer only covers these things, and I don't have to worry about the domains.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Another question, like coming from the lens of the security leadership, based on the return on security investment perspective, high trust, like you said, it's expensive and it's stringent. With all due respect, it's great, no doubt about it. But if I'm going for that, could we say that then after that there could not be a necessity of doing SOC 2 Type 2 and ISO 27001? If not, then what is the delta that those people are doing, which high trust has still not covered it up, which I don't believe so, but yeah, again, and then, if that is the case, the latter is the case, can high trust assessors like Accorian give the complementary services for those additional certifications if we go for high trust?
So there is a delta. I think it's what, Karen, finance is basically the big difference, right? It's the finance. SOC covers more financials, high trust doesn't get into financials.
I'm talking about SOC 2.
SOC 2.
SOC 2. Yeah.
SOC 2 has a financial aspect to it.
Financials.
So they're looking at budgets, they're looking at allocations and things like that, where high trust doesn't. And it really, it comes down to what the need is of your organization. In many cases, we'll find that an organization that does high trust doesn't need a SOC or an ISO, and because it's enough. But in some cases,
it's enough, but then
maybe you got a European say you guys are working with a European organization, we could do high trust, but they want ISO because that's what they accept. So it really comes down to what you need it for, and where it fits in your GTM, for whoever you're working with. And a lot of times we'll see this where we'll talk you out of high trust. I'll sit there and say, there's really no need for you to do high trust at all. We can do a SOC 2 Type 2 and you're going to get the same level of coverage because nobody's asking you to go do this. I'm gonna save you a lot of money. Put high trust on the back burner until somebody is telling you got to do it. But yeah, you got to look at your organization, what benefits you the most, and what effort you need to put into it. But yeah, a lot of times, I'll sit there and say, and the European one's the easy one. Because nobody in Europe really understands high trust. And we're pretty much anywhere between India and the U.S. and not even Canada. India and the U.S. we understand high trust. Nobody else in the world understands high trust because it's just not the standard we follow. So.
Yeah. And for R2, inheritance is great. It reduces a lot of our efforts and time and reliance. But at the same time, I'm just trying to understand the concept over here. Okay. For your SOC reporting, you can still have your mutually exclusive. You can omit out your public cloud service providers, and you can still get away with it. Or even you can carve them out. But in R2, you certainly cannot do that. And when you can't do that, SOC 2 Type 2 reports of those public cloud service providers, at least the 4 to 5 bigger players out there, are available. But then their high trust reports, even after signing the NDAs, are still not available and accessible. I'm talking about the actual the assessments. So in that case, how do we really go? Because at the end, being a very small customer, if I'm relying on AWS and GCPs and Azures of the world, or probably all of them, then how do I get the inheritance?
I'm smiling because I got a really good answer for you. We're working on a trust under high trust. So there is a and it's really weird with high trust because high trust is so geared towards whatever the customer wants. And a lot of customers don't want to share this information. I mean, a high trust report it's got a lot of damning information if you look at it. I mean, you know, again, we don't want the high trust report getting out to anybody that shouldn't be there, but we also, you know, you can take a high trust report and, you know, if you're, you know, say, you know, you're looking at a vendor and you say, give me your high trust report, and you look at that and you can say, well, you guys didn't score high enough in this domain, you can't be a vendor. Well, they don't want to give you that report because it may, you know, keep them from it. But they are creating a trust center that you will have access. You know, you'll have to be a high trust, you know, MyCSF subscriber. The customers who will have their information posted there, and it currently is in beta. It's live right now. You know, but customers that are authorizing their information to be put up there, you can see who they are, what level of assessment they went through, and I think it's domain scores. I think it's Oracle domain scores. So it's there. It's coming, and it'll be more detailed. But again, it'll never be public. It'll only be through a specific. You have to be a customer, and then in order to be on that list, you have to authorize it.
And would there be the times coming up wherein, like, you know, this MyCSF thing, because as a, you know, user entity, MyCSF is something which is still, like, you know, way too technical. So though I understand, like, you know, people like you are always there to support us as the, you know, assessors to translate that into, like, you know, understandable manner so that we can upload the right information, so that it scopes out correctly, accurately, as per what we are actually, like, you know, practicing. But then at the same time, what happens is, like, if we overcommit something, then also it's a problem, and if we miss out something, then it's again like a huge problem that we missed out certain thing, and then we identify that at a later stage in the certification, roadmap or the journey. So, is high trust planning anything wherein, like, the MyCSF could be leveraged in a way that, like, you know, it easily able to scan through my landscape based on the IP that I fed it, like, you know, for your third-party attestations, what do you have? You have the bit site of the world or the security scorecards of the world. What are they doing? Like, you know, you provide the IP, they are able to scan through your workloads, your particular resources, and then they came up with, like, you know, all the domain level vulnerabilities out there. Similarly, like, can MyCSF tell tomorrow to me with the help of the generative AI leveragement that this is what, like, you know, your IT environment looks like, and this is what could be scoped in, up to a, you know, extent. I'm not talking about 100% within 100% effectiveness.
Remember, high trust is your tool to do your assessment.
Agreed. That's why
it's not a GRC, okay, and it never will be. They will never go down that path. Thus, the reason they're partnering with the Vantas and Dratas and Trust Ones and all them of the world. You know, but that being said, there's a lot of capability within MyCSF, and there's a lot of new things in MyCSF that have been added probably in, I guess, what, the last 6 months. I mean, they've rewritten a lot of stuff. There's a lot of new capability in there. But you have to go into this thinking this is an assessment tool. It's not a reporting tool. It's not a you know, managing my security framework for, you know, external use. It is literally just for you to get through the assessment process. That being said, that's where we come in and we try to help you with that, gapping that other, you know, piece of it. What else do you need here? What information can we pull, not only from MyCSF, but maybe from a GRC tool that you have, or maybe some internal stuff. You know, what else can we do with you to help you build that framework, you know, for your security program, be able to post that out, you know, build dashboards, build different things. We're going to talk a little bit more. Addie's going to talk a little bit about some of our vServices stuff that we do. So, you know, we understand that there's a gap there with MyCSF, but it's also the fact that MyCSF is never intended to do any of that. It's literally a data collection tool for you to do your assessment.
Agreed, but then again, like, the end user needs to understand that as well.
Yeah, they do. I mean, and high trust is getting better. I mean, I think there's, you know, and I think I've said this before. I've been involved with high trust for a really long time, but I've never been a very strong supporter of high trust. I think there's been a lot of issues with the framework. I think there's a lot of issues with the MyCSF tool and the focus of the company. In the past, probably year and a half, I've seen a 180-degree turnaround in the organization. There's a tremendous amount of work being done in MyCSF I know this because I'm on the actual committee that's helping rewrite my CSF. And you know, we've worked directly with them. You know, myself and Primo, CEO, we were in April. We were in Frisco, Texas, walking through where is HITRUST going with all this, with their senior leadership. And you know, and they told us all this stuff. They told us about the continuous monitoring stuff that's going to be happening. There's going to be and some of what you're asking for may come out of this, because what's going to end up happening, if there's going to be continuous monitoring, you know, processes, there's going to have to be dashboarding. There's going to have to be some type of interaction, both with, you know, your providers and with your vendors and your third parties and whoever, you know. And there is capability for organizations to do more with it. You know, the big problem is, you know, every time you ask for more, HITRUST wants more. You know, so, you know, it's just one of those things where, you know, you gotta look at what the tool really is designed for, and then what else are you needing out of that, you know. And there are some more reporting stuff. There's more capabilities coming with it, but you know, I'll be the first one to sit there and tell you, you know, my CSF is not one of my favorite tools to play with, but it's the only tool I got, and it does the job, you know.
And
Okay.
with not applicable ones, when the management is providing the assertion with the reasoning, like, you know, why it is justified to be not applicable to them, who is going to be the final one to sign that off? Is it going to be the assessor or the management themselves? Or is it going to be, like, you know, again done the quality check by the HITRUST? Because like you said,
A combination of all three.
Okay.
So an NA, when you look at a control, the first thing you do, and this is something, you know, we teach our assessors in the beginning, you know, when you say, I don't do that, my organization doesn't do that, the first question is, should you be doing that? Just because you don't do it doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it. So an NA may not be applicable. It may be, hey, I don't do that and I should be doing that and I'm going to get a 0 because I don't do this. So that's the first question. The second question is going to be, okay, you don't do this, but why don't you do this? Do you do something else that covers this? You know, I don't have a SIM in place, but you know, we log all these reports. We have a team that does all this review, and here's how we escalate, you know, issues. We identify and escalate issues. Okay, I don't have to answer all the SIM questions, but it's not an NA. I'm answering it through the, you know, what the process that I do. So when we put all that stuff together, that's the first thing we go through when we start identifying NAs. When Shashil was talking about that gap review, you know, it's one of the very first things we do. We put the NA justification in. We review that internally. We talk about it with you guys. It's a collaborative approach, and in most cases, we do pretty well, you know, with our side of it. Occasionally, when it goes to QA, HITRUST will push back on an NA, and they'll sit there and say, "You can't NA that." You know, but I think we've gotten really good at which ones you can and which ones you can't. But again, that's part of our role, is to make sure, you know, we're helping you author what that justification, identify first, then author what that justification is, if it's actually true NA.
Yeah, again, the reason behind asking that was, like, you know, most of the...
I think you asked me this last time too, I remember. I think we talked about NAs.
So, about this one is typically because of the JNAI coming into the picture, because many companies will tell that, like, you know, we are not hitting onto the production data, we are not leveraging that, but we are doing some sort of, like, you know, the intelligence work around automated decision making and all of those things. How are we then going to be, like, you know, as an user entity, going to be segregating it out, whether we want to scope that part or not, and we want to, like, you know, actually de-scope that.
Yeah.
So that's where my question
And AI is a little different, and there's still more of a learning curve to have happen here, but we have two different frameworks, if you will, for AI and HITRUST. We have the AI RMF, which is kind of the, I'm getting started, my end users have, you know, they can go use ChatGPT, or maybe they have individual stuff, but it's not being incorporated into the company, you know, process. It's not being built in applications, you're not using it for data manipulation or whatever. It's more informative type stuff. The HITRUST AI certification is directly driven towards organizations who are using it in a development aspect. So those are the two things I'm going to determine with you at the very beginning with AI. In the core control set, there are no AI controls. You have to select AI RMF or the AI certification to get those 44 controls. And so, again, and We're going to talk through how are you using AI, what are you doing, what are you doing there? Is it everything from an acceptable use policy just for the end user, or is it actually being developed? Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks to everybody. Survived the first half. Only 3 more hours to go. You guys ready? All right, so I'm going to get Adarsh to come up, and he's going to talk about common challenges and then jump into scoping. And then I'll come back up. We're going to talk about some of the other things that are going on, some of the new stuff that I've been hinting around at, and we'll talk a little bit more about how Accorian can help you guys. So here comes Adarsh.
Thank you, Sean. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adarsh. I'm glad I get to speak after we have had coffees. All right, let's look at what are the common challenges we see people facing when they are when they're performing high trust assessment. First of all, are there any challenges? I would say definitely yes. Do they kill you? No, unless we address the challenges that we're gonna see in the upcoming slide. Alright, so these are some of the challenges, the common challenges we have seen during the assessments. The first thing is how complex high trust framework is. Well, with all the slides we have already seen, it's not a surprise that high trust is not the easiest framework out there. Because one, we do not have a static number of controls. It's always dynamic, depends on a lot of stuff like factors, scopes, all of that, right? Because when, unlike your ISO or SOC, I mean, you can pretty well be prepared for the assessment just looking at the controls from the history of the framework. It is not the case with high trust, because you're always up to something new. One is the controls change basis your factors. Also, the framework keeps evolving. Like Sean mentioned, currently we are running on 11.4.5. Soon we will be, in coming year we'll be introduced to a new framework where there will be a lot of changes. That's one thing. And next is gap identification. Okay, this is the very tricky part. Thanks to Sushil, he covered the Accorian's process on how detailed our gap assessment is. Right, we not only cover the control requirement on a higher level, we go into the depth because it is required to. We check when we are trying to identify the gaps. Not only we look at the control requirement, we see the sub-controls. The classic example Sean mentioned was your ISO or SOC 2 will tell you should have antivirus, right? But in high trust, we see there should be limited number of admins, who have admin privileges. It has to be, the signature should be almost daily, and you cannot bypass the scan. So when we, in classic ISO or SOC 2, we just see, okay, and an endpoint, a server has antivirus installed. But when it is high trust, we see all the sub levels of the control. So, and that makes it a little difficult, not impossible, because you have a lot of things to cover. And so we do it in a very detailed way as high trust expects, and even the that will depend on like some controls we have seen up to 13-14 evaluative elements, and some have like 2-3. Next is maintaining continuous compliance. Of course, it's not a one-time activity. You're certified, and that's it. You're free to go. No. So there is a sustenance activity. We call it like if it is an auto assessment, there is an interim assessment. E1 is valid for 1 year. I1 is valid for 1 year too, but we have something called as rapid research. Some will know, in very detail. So high trust expects, we not only get certified and forget the compliance. So you should always be on top of the compliance. Make sure none of the configuration is missed as it is supposed to be. The next is insufficient resource allocation. So since we already know, I don't want to repeat it a million times, that high trust is difficult. But also what the challenge that we have seen lately is lack of good resources at the client end, right? So we have few representatives who will work with us when we plan the assessment, when we discuss the roadmap. But it also, the responsibility is with a lot of SMEs. And the major problem what we see is the company do not have great resources that can support the management when there is a solid effort to get HITRUST certified. And again, financial resources, I think we saw why HITRUST is called the golden framework, and gold is not cheap. It's expensive, you need to spend a lot of money to get that certificate. It is expensive, starting from my CISOs subscription, which again is annual level, and you have to pay for report credits. So it is expensive. So when the organization is planning their annual budget, a substantial amount must go towards HITRUST certification. It's not easy. It is a little expensive. Then we have third-party dependency. Of course, the current IT arrangement, it's norm that for a task, for a delivery, we will engage multiple third-party vendors. Like suppose if your deliverable is an application, is a source code, the development can happen in-house, but maybe the testing will be outsourced to some other company. So the challenge is you, of course, knowing the importance of the framework, will make sure you're following the guidelines. But the challenging part is to make sure the vendors will do the same. So that requires your regular TPRMs, right? Annual quarterly meets to make sure everything is in place. So these are few. Yeah. Next is to fully leverage the certification. So it's very important once you're certified, you just don't let it go. You should make sure your marketing team will understand the importance of getting the certificate. You have spent endless hours, to finish this milestone, and the resource, the human resources, the finance, everything is, there's a lot of effort. And lately I got the number as well. The return on investment is 460%. That's huge. That's really huge. So we should make sure to educate the marketing team to, advertise, make sure everybody is aware that your company is HITRUST certified. There are so many forums, put it on LinkedIn. And Accorian, we are planning to start a new service where we have a one-on-one interviews to make to have a dialogue to identify how the process was, right? How did it start? How did the gap assessment go? How difficult was it? How many gaps did you find out? How many months or days you took it to complete the remediation? And the validation testing period, how was the evidence collection, how was the scoring, everything. So the reach will be higher, and it will also be educative to others as well. When you say, we got HITRUST certified, it's a very big deal, right? And that's how you promote your efforts, and you should. It's not an easy job. So if we look at scoping, right? There are So the HITRUST is strictly a scoping based framework and assessment. And so if it is E1 and I1, there are fixed number of controls, 44 for E1 and 182 for I1. If it is an R2 is the number of controls will depend on some of the factors like uh, third parties, your regulatory factors, how are the location of where the application sits. A lot of things decide on the scoping. So there are 5 factors that will, mainly there are 5 factors that will decide your scoping. First is the type of high trust assessment. Of course, the main thing here, because if you want, if you're just starting your journey towards high trust, it should be even, because there are 44 controls. Of course, there are many sub-controls, but let's say there are 44. So that is how you can get to understand how high trust works, what are the expectations, how is it different from the other frameworks like ISOs and SOC 2s. And then we have I1, again, fixed number of controls, 182. It's just like more number of controls from I1 and less than R2. R2 will typically start maybe from 250 and it can go up to 1000, 2000 controls, right? And then we have systems and platforms. That will decide the scoping of the assessment. Because I'm sure somebody might have said this, high trust do not certify the organization. It only certifies the implemented systems. So please be sure that the most important activity in the high trust assessment should be your scoping, right? To make sure you have identified systems that are relevant to the assessment and try to eliminate systems that do not make sense. If a system, so largely it is derived basis on the systems which store, transmit, process your PHI. Facilities, again, a very important factor, because if you're hosted, if the system, if the application which is in scope is hosted on your in-house data center, then your office will be in scope. If you're completely hosted on if you're having a cloud service provider like your AWS or Azure, then you can eliminate your office location, because nothing is residing on the office location, everything is on cloud, and there is inheritance that you can use. And also outsource services. Like I said, if you have a company who will be doing your SOC monitoring, who will be doing your NOC monitoring, and who is responsible to collect the logs from the systems. So if those companies are receiving the PHI in terms of logs, or if they have direct access, like if you're developing the application, if they are testing the application, obviously they will have access to the PHI. So they should be part of the scope. So outsource services definitely should be considered when you're scoping the assessment. And last is your federal, state, regional compliance factors. So again, the state laws, the central laws, depending on the location of the office, your headquarters or whatever, should be, you should make sure you're covering all those federal controls, and they should be part of your scope as well. We know there are 3 types of assessment, E1, I1, R2. Systems and platforms. Like I said, when I said you should only scope in the systems and platforms, you should understand, there should be a definition. Like you have 100 systems, which system to take into scope. So, again, this is what? A lot of time we are saying, high trust only certifies the implemented system and not the organization. So, there are few things you should question yourself when you are trying to scope the systems or platforms. Do your clients rely on the system or platform? If yes, those systems and platforms should definitely be in the scope. Is critical client data being stored, transmitted, received, or processed within the system? Again, if this is the case, then there's no question, they should be in scope. And is the system or platform critical to the operations of your organization? There's no doubt for the fact that they are very critical systems. Securing them, implementing controls onto those systems is very, very important. So they should be on the scope. we strongly recommend, I would say, what is important than to add required system into the scope is not to add which is not required, right? You should always try to limit the scope, right? Only have systems which make sense, which meet these criteria, okay? There's no harm, we will be implementing security controls on those systems, but it will unnecessarily multiply your efforts. You will be implementing the controls on the systems which are not even required to be in the assessment. So it's very important that you identify the systems and platforms on these criteria and limit the scope, and which will help the assessment go very smoothly. Again, what facilities to include? Like I said, if all the application is completely hosted on cloud, you don't have to. You need to identify. You need to come up with a data flow diagram, your network architecture, and identify the systems or the network infrastructure on where the data is going. If your office data center has nothing to do with the flow of PHI, and everything is hosted on cloud, it doesn't make sense to add your office in the scope. And domain 18 is completely about physical security, so more than 80% of the controls can be inherited if there is 100% usage of a third-party cloud hosting provider. So yeah, internally hosted data center, corporate offices, if that is the case, the PHI data is touching the systems in your office. Call centers, suppose you have engaged few call centers which will work, which for some reason, for the business reasons, they are supposed to receive the PHI data to process any request. Call center should be part of the scope, and then we have processing sites, same explanation, and other relevant operational locations. And the last point is very important, always scope based on where sensitive data flows, and try to avoid which is not necessary. Regulatory factor, another very important factor to consider when scoping the assessment. So again, this will be applicable if you are doing R2, because you need to select those factors which is not the case when it is an E1 or I1. So there are few key inherent risk factors, like the type of organization. So these factors, regulatory and inherent key factors, will decide the number of controls. When I said R2, we have seen the controls from 250 up to 1,200. We have a pool of 2,000 plus controls. So the type of organization, are you a business entity, right? Number of records that you process on a daily basis, and data, is the data accessible by third party? So we have a whole domain which talks about security controls when the third party is involved. So if the question to this is yes, the data is accessible by a third party, naturally the controls will be introduced where we look at how secure the data is residing at the third party, and also is the data available via internet. If the system is publicly positioned, do you have a DMZ? If it is facing the internet, it is easy, it is posing more threat. So it is, again, if the answer to this question will be yes, there will be some more controls which address, how the systems which are facing the internet are handled in the data center. And we have regulatory factors like CMMC, HIPAA, FISMA, and others. If you have to abide by these regulatory factors as well, you click yes, and they will be added as the factors, and they will decide the number of controls you will be having in your assessment. And one note, even in I1 assessment do not require factor selection. My CSF do not even let you do so, but offer few factors to add on to your assessments like HIPAA or and AI controls. Outsource services. I mentioned working with third parties is a standard practice now, right? So we should be very sure that the vendors with whom we share the data, or we let the data go to their internet or their infrastructure, to make sure they are following the similar strong security practices. And if it is an E1 and I1, there is an option to carve out, and even inheritance and reliance is always there. And if it is an R2 validated assessment, you must include any third party that support your scope systems. And when I say third party, it is not just hosting providers. It could be your, like I said, the SOC monitoring, NOC monitoring, somebody who is only to collect logs. If they're relevant, they should be considered in the scope. And data shredding and storage vendors, obviously we have to pay more attention that how data is is wiped off, how data is treated once it is no longer required, right? So if we have vendors who are only for data disposal, and how do they store the data, they should be in scope. And managed IT service providers, quite naturally, they should be in scope because they do receive the PHI, critical PHI, and they will have access to our critical systems. Outsourced software development firms, I took the example of if you have hired somebody to test your source code for the application, they will have access to the code. In some way or the other, they will have access to PHI. So we should make sure that their security posture is strong enough. And more, and also, not every third party should be in scope. Of course, you have to go through these factors. Should make a very good thinking that, okay, if you have a third party who manages your attendance systems, there's no way they should be in your scope. Scoping for success. Proper scoping is the foundation of a successful HITRUST assessment. Like I said, you should minimize as much as possible. You should minimize the scope. I don't mean to, eliminate the required systems and keep the scope minimum. No. Make sure you have all the right systems and platforms. And like I said, it is always important to make sure you're not adding unwanted systems, because it will just multiply your efforts. You're spending time worrying about systems which should not even be in the scope in the first place, right? And those systems will take more time. So all your efforts will be wasted if you have unnecessary systems or platforms or outsourced third-party vendors, anyone. So it is very important to scope appropriately, very accurately, to make sure the assessment goes very smooth. What's new in HITRUST? Sean, over to you. Thank you so much.
I'll cover that.
Thank you.
You got applause. I'm fairly certain him and Shashil will not volunteer public speaking again. I'm like, sorry guys. All right. So what's new? I've been hinting around with a lot of different things, things that have already happened, and things that are to come. So right now, we have a lot of expansion on the threat analysis. I mentioned that earlier. HITRUST is the only framework that uses a threat analysis approach. So there's a lot of different things that are happening here. They have an entire team that is working towards identifying new threats in your environment, things that are happening in the world as a whole, and they're trying to figure out how they're, what controls either need to be, new controls need to be created, or what controls need to be refined to address these threats. The regulatory stuff, I mentioned, if you guys were here before, the last time I gave this presentation, it was 40 authoritative sources. Now we're over 60 authoritative sources. So, it's getting broader. They're bringing more foundational frameworks into the HITRUST world, and they're trying to expand out. So we're seeing a lot of expansion throughout the world with new frameworks, but in the States we're seeing a lot of things with state and state ramp, fed ramp, some of the different municipalities are coming up with their own standards. We're seeing third-party standards now being applied to different regional areas. So they're bringing all that stuff in. A big example of that would be if you're working with anybody in the state of New York that's touching PHI data, you now have to go through an OHIP certification. OHIP is an absolute nightmare. I think it's 835 controls by itself. It's crazy. HITRUST has created a subset that you can add that to your assessment as part of one of the factors that Darsh was talking about, and I think it reduces it to 615 additional controls, but it's saving a little bit. I would recommend doing it outside of HITRUST actually, but that's a whole different story. But that's some of the things they're looking at. They're looking at some of the expansion on some of these areas that are coming up. More quality control reviews, assessor, and industry feedback loop. Like I said, we're now involved. Accorian is now has say in a lot of what we're seeing with both the framework itself and MyCSF. And we have an expanded assessor council this time around, where we have more organizations like us that are coming together, and we're trying to look at this holistically. It's not all about competition anymore. It's about building a good solid product. And then automated delivery via MyCSF. Like I said, I'm not going to be the one to stand here and tout all the great and wonderful things about MyCSF. It's the tool we use to do the assessment, as I said earlier. But it's gotten a lot better. If you haven't dealt with it in a long time, it's not the same tool that we used to have a few years ago. And there is a ton of new stuff coming into it. And it is getting better. So there's new things there. The HITRUST, we've mentioned the version 11 change. So if you've done HITRUST before, prior to version 11, the 9 series and below, they were hard, but they kind of were pretty clear cut. It was here, do this, and you're good to go. Have your policy procedure, demonstrate your implementation, you're good to go. 11 introduced the evaluative element. We've talked about that quite a bit here. Excuse me, the guys went through how it's broken down, that you have a base control and then you have these sub-elements that go with it. So now every control within HITRUST, when you go into MyCSF, you can see the control requirement, and then it has all these details, and it's labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. So HITRUST requires you to be tested on every one of those elements now. So your policy must address that, your procedure must directly address that element as it pertains to the control, and your implementation, obviously. So again, that's a big change from where we used to be. If you guys remember back in the day, if you've done this, you had the control and then you had this other definition area. And everybody's kind of like, well, that's just kind of explaining it. And then HITRUST is like, no, you should be following that. Well, you never said that. So everybody had different interpretations of what the controls actually meant and how they were supposed to be implemented in the organization. They've taken that discussion away by saying, here's the control, here's the element, do it this way. The bigger probably thing that I'll say personally that I've seen with HITRUST over the last year is a holistic change in their personality. They're very customer oriented now. They're very assessor oriented, and being one that always considered it was us against them. Me as the assessor, you as the customer against HITRUST, because HITRUST would never agree to anything that we would say. They would never, it was always too hard to get to. They have now opened up the curtains, and they're letting us see how things work. They're very amenable to ideas on how to approach specific situations. They understand, there's not always a round peg and a round hole scenario. Sometimes it has to change. So we've worked with that quite a bit with them. We've customized assessments to specific environments for customers. We've actually sat down. Probably one of the biggest things we do now is organizations that are making changes after they complete their assessment. So you just completed your R2 and all of a sudden you get this great idea. Let's take all our on-prem and put it on AWS. Well, everything that we tested for your on-prem is probably, it's not going to be certified anymore. Maybe if you changed enough because you're moving into a different S3 or you're changing anything else, your whole certification may not be valid anymore. So you have to talk to us and we have to sit down and work with HITRUST and figure out what needs to be changed, what can be changed, and when can it be changed. So we want to make sure that, again, we're working with you, we're talking with HITRUST about this, and this is something kind of new. HITRUST was never really open to doing this. It was always just do it, get it done the way it's supposed to be done, and they'll pass or fail, whatever might happen. I'm clicking or staticky, I'm something, We're just dealing with it. All right, so the MyCSF changes. Updated scoping tool. In the scoping piece of this, if you haven't seen it, there's a whole section that you go through where you put in all your company's information. We talk about the number of records and transactions, and do you have Wi-Fi? Do you have dial-up? Does anybody have dial-up anymore? Fax machines. We still ask those questions. So you put all this information in there, and that information determines how many controls you get, what controls and how many from each domain. So that's been refined, that's getting refined again, because one of the things that I actually brought up about 6 months ago is it's getting very hard with the way organizations work today to determine number of actual records and transactions. What I would rather do is determine size of the systems. Terabytes, petabytes, whatever it is. So we're actually putting that in now. You're going to have that as part of selection. If you can't identify the number of records or transactions, you're going to be able to put in how much data do you have, what's the actual physical size, and that's going to help you to determine controls based off of your data, your infrastructure, your network. Enhanced inheritance, I won't go too far into this here. That's really just what I talked about earlier, bringing more providers into it. Improved workflow automation. And a lot of this here, there's a lot of new things inside MyCSF that a lot of people, that haven't been in there a while will be amazed to see. There's a whole section where there's a service provider index now by control. So if you're sitting there and you're looking at a control, that's and you say, hey, I don't do that. In that actual control in MyCSF, you can actually click on it and it'll bring up a list of service providers and details for you to contact those individuals to figure out how to implement whatever you need from that. And trust me, we pay a lot of money to be on that index. So somebody click on it, please. But it's a great tool because a lot of times, if you've done this before, these controls sometimes can be very ambiguous and you don't really know what they mean. So, if your assessor sometimes may not be technical enough to understand what the control means either. They know how to test it, but they don't really know what it means. So being able to click on that, see a service provider, or see some more detail around what that specific control is. So those are some new things that they've put in there. Integrated with the new assessment types. I talked about the E1, the I1. That's kind of going to be it. They're not talking about adding any new assessments from that perspective. One of the big changes they're doing, they started this with the E1 and now the I1, where we talked about the factors where in the E1 and I1 you can't add factors. Now you can add a HIPAA controls to your E1 and your I1. You can add the AI controls, and we're going to start having the ability to add other specific factors. So you can do an E1 and maybe with GDPR, or something like that. So that capability is going to be coming out here really quick as well. And then enhanced reporting, and I think this was some of the stuff that we were being asked earlier in the questions. What more can I use MyCSF for? So everybody, if you've ever been in there, there's this whole analytics section, and they got about 22 reports up there. And in most cases, as a customer, you probably never look at any of those reports. As an assessor, we look at the score, the one that looks at the scoring for each domain to see if it matches up with what we have in our tool, just to make sure the scoring stays the same. The reports are now very dynamic. They're becoming very useful, and they are giving a lot of information that you guys can bring into your project management portion of it during the assessment, and then also how to take a look at one of the cool things was running a report for an authoritative source for me to be able to sit there and say, now that I completed my R2, where do I land on the SOC 2 scale? Where do I land on the ISO scale? Or if I want to look at another factor, what other things do I do? Would I actually pass one of these? You know, am I compliant with one of these? And you can actually, there's a report in there now, you can go down there and pick that source, and based off of what you've already been assessed on, it'll tell you where you land for that other framework. Okay. Our glory slide, it's all about us now. You know, and we talked a little bit, Addie touched a little bit earlier. It feels like this morning after these guys were talking. You know, we've been an assessor since 2018. We are in the top 5 assessors in the world from a volume perspective. Like I said before, our big claim to fame is we're the only assessor to be, you know, to hold a 100% certification rate. You follow our process, you will be certified. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You deviate from the process, you're on your own. And I'm going to argue with you until I'm blue in the face to not deviate from the process. We've done, you know, well over 400 assessments now, large, small, you know, assessments. We are the security partner for Civitas, which is the oversight committee for all the HIEs with the health exchanges for the U.S. So we do a lot of those health exchange projects, which carry anywhere from like 800 to 1,300 controls. And you think you got it bad, wait till you see one of these things roll out. And guess what? We still got 90 days to get it done in. But they'll be really nice to us. Sometimes they'll give us an extra 30 days. So, but anyway, you know, we've got a lot of experience here. We know what we're talking about. We know how to make this a successful project for you guys. And really at the end of the day, it's just, you know, sit down, talk with us, figure out what the path looks like. You know, I'll tell you, we'll be honest, and you know, probably to a fault, where, you know, if you don't need to do this, I'm gonna tell you don't do it. We'll figure something else out. If you need security, you know, implement your organization. We'll figure out a path for you to get there. If high trust is where you got to go, I'll tell you high trust is where you got to go. But you know, we're going to get you there. We're going to work with you. I said it earlier. I say this all the time. I'm not here for the quick sale. This is a 15, 20-year partnership. I've got a lot of things that we do. You should be using 95% of every service line we have. You should be implementing into your company at some level or another. And unfortunately, this is the way the world is. And if you're not doing all these things with us or with somebody, your exposure is pretty broad. So, all right. One thing I want to run through here, because this is kind of key to the title of why you guys all came here. High Trust and you specifically here in India, you want to do business, or you are doing business in the U.S. What does this mean to you guys? You know, for organizations that are or support any healthcare across the board, I think we've kind of hammered that one home. Any BPO, any service provider, anybody like that, you guys need to be doing High Trust. You know, don't wait for somebody to tell you to do it. You need to be doing it. IT cloud providers, anybody that's working in that space, specifically in the healthcare realm, but really across the board. If you're doing any type of SaaS level hosting, management, development product, you know, you name it, High Trust is a good platform for you. And like I said, it doesn't have to always be healthcare. Pharma, life sciences, fintech, which is interesting because High Trust for years has tried to get into the fintech market, and you know, we have all these other standards that are out there from the financial side. And when you start looking at it, High Trust is still more robust than most of the other, you know, fintech standards out there. So, you know, you can easily apply this to that. BPMs, you know, outsourcing firms, startups, obviously, you know, you got to start up. By all means, let's talk about what it is. But, you know, your primary goal here is to make yourself marketable, protect yourself, but make yourself marketable to the U.S. market. And one of the things I just said this earlier was, you know, use the badge, use the certification, make sure everybody in the company, what Darsh was talking about, leveraging this, make sure people in the company know what this means to your organization. It is and does and will carry a lot of clout for those who know what it's about. So again, if you're trying to get into a UHC or a Blue or an Anthem or whoever, believe me, they know what high trust is. And in many cases, we're starting to see more of these larger provider organizations forcing their vendors, part of their TPR program, to become high trust certified if you want to continue to work with them and receive data from them. So, it's going to be beneficial no matter what, that organizations here understand this and that you guys start proactively pushing into that direction. All right. Hattie, you want me to do case studies or? All right, keep going, right? Easiest presentation he ever had. He introduced me and sat down. All right, just some high level stuff here. Health tech SaaS startup here in Bangalore, offering AI-driven patient engagement stuff. Sound kind of familiar? To onboard hospital systems, they needed to demonstrate HIPAA and GDPR compliance. We worked with them to align them with an I-1. Brought in the core NIST controls, the GDPR controls, and obviously brought in the HIPAA with it. If I'm not mistaken, I believe, with that assessment there, the core high trust covered pretty much 95% of everything that we needed for NIST and GDPR. It was only a handful of additional controls we had to look at from outside of that. Worked with them to roll all this stuff out. There was probably about 8 months of remediation effort that needed to be applied here. And most of this really wasn't anything more than the company just needed time for budgeting and acquisition to get the tools and stuff in place. They were pretty well along, but they just needed help. So they worked with us. We got them through the whole process. Took about 12 months total to get everything done with them. And it was, like I said, the remediation effort was kind of back and forth a little bit. Some of it was in, we didn't necessarily have to go through all of the incubation period with it, because if you got something in that's already there and it just needs to be continued to be rolled out, we're not going to incubate that. We're just going to let you finish rolling it out before we start testing it. If it was brand new, then you got to put it in and let it bake for a while before we touch it. So the big impact here was, and this is back from them telling us, faster US client onboarding. They said that they saw a direct responsiveness from the clients because they had this here. US hospitals specifically, and I know we've got a couple guys I was talking to that are in this specific space. And this is opening the doors for them because now they're able to go market to other hospital groups. And they're saying, hey, we're here, we're high trust, we've done all this, we're ready to go. And they're in the bid process for several other ones. Elevated trust, obviously, and I said this is using that leverage. Everybody knows it. Put the logo everywhere it makes sense. I made the joke earlier, put it on the side of your car. Hey, you paid a lot of money for it, go show it off. And then reduced the need for fragmented audits across compliance regimes. So, and again, this is that kind of, audit once, cover multiple compliance, side of the house. So going forward now, the cycle is much easier for them. And as they start looking into these other markets, we'll look at, maybe some additional frameworks that probably 60, 70, 80% of those control bases for those additional frameworks are already covered. Case 2, just IT BPO provider here in Pune. Not really too dissimilar than most customers we have. We do a lot of R2 work. These guys came in, they had to have an R2 assessment. So, we worked with them, kind of the same approach, worked through the scoping side of this here to make sure that that they had everything identified the way it needed to be identified within the organization, within the scope. Worked heavily with these guys, and I call it out here stakeholder education, because And you guys probably know that, most of you sitting here, you guys can walk out of this room, go back to your organizations, and they'll look at you like you got three eyes when you start talking about security compliance. They're like, oh, whatever. If they haven't heard the buzzword, they don't know what you're talking about. So what we try to do is make sure, one, you understand it specifically, why you have to do this, what does it mean to do these things, and then you have those key points to be able to go back to your leadership, back to your SMEs, to get their buy-in, to get them to participate, and get them to help you get this done, because this is not something you as a compliance person can do by yourself. So anyway, so they went down the R2 validity assessment with HIPAA. We worked, pretty similar approach that we do with everybody. We managed to get them through in about 15 months. Was from start to finish. That was getting the gap going to the time they got their final report, and that's about average. And again, a lot of this, there's a lot of factors here. The guys covered it a little bit earlier. But it really, there's a couple areas that depend directly on you guys. We come out of that gap, here's the holes, how long is it going to take you to fix them? I can't fix them for you. I'll drive you, I have an entire PM staff, half of them are sitting in this room right now, that will get on your backs and keep pushing you to get these things done. But in some cases, it may take you a couple weeks, other cases, it may take you months. I think our longest is about 3 years. It took one customer, but it's so many things. It's budget, it's resources, willpower. It's just crazy. But these are the things that keep hitting. I'm pulling my best at Darsh here. I keep clicking slides. But these are the areas where we work with you guys to understand. Do you need help with this? Is this something you guys can handle yourself? We have partners, we have MSPs, we have, we even do some product resale in some areas for tools. So we'll work with you on that as well. Okay, so again, same sort of thing here for the impact. Reduce the audit burden, consolidated the overlap, audits. This one here specifically, we know they're going into a SOC ISO round, so we're trying to sync them up now to make sure that when we start the rebuild for high trust, that the SOC and ISO are right there with it, so they're not sitting in this perpetual continuous audit cycle, because everybody loves doing audits, right? That's what we live for. Operational consistency, and this is kind of key too, because if you think about it, it kind of goes down that scoping thing. So Darsh said something interesting earlier that caught my attention was, when you're doing scoping and you say, hey, I'm not going to include this over here, I'm going to, we're going to carve that out, we're going to leave that out. It doesn't necessarily mean you're not implementing that process across the entire company. You should, and in most cases, you better. So if I'm rolling out, Intune on all my endpoints, I'm not just going to do it to the devices that are within this specific area that's being assessed. I want to roll that out to my entire organization. So you want to have that consistency built within your organization. Economy of scale, build it correctly. And make sure everybody's doing the same thing and they know why they're doing it. And then last thing was competitive differentiation. And this was directly back, from the client, where they said they felt this elevated them amongst their competition. And they were able to immediately, I think within like 3 months, secure like 2 more additional customers of their own, merely based on the fact that they now had the logo. So, all in all, I think we're looking at client trust and market access. If you're kind of compare yourself to these here, accelerated engagements with hospitals, preferred vendor status from payers. Compliance efficiencies, brand and risk posture. High trust gives organizations here in India, this opportunity to jump ahead, to say, what, I'm going to be proactive in it, and we know we have to do this. Why wait for somebody to tell you to go do it? And in many cases today, the difference between getting that new project or getting that new client, you can't wait 15 months to get a certification done. You got to have it in your back pocket already. So, you know, you'll lose business, and we see this all the time. You will lose business in the US if you don't have this and you are working specifically in the healthcare region, okay? And then the big thing, I should have put that in big bold letters there. Working with Accorian enhances your implementation's success and certification readiness. So that is specifically Accorian, no other assessor firm. Okay, they can't help you, but only us. We're the only ones that can do this. All right. Addie had to wake up and come join me. So he's going to take over. He's going to talk about some of the other services we have here and drag me in as needed.
Yes, thank you, Sean.
I want your sympathy now.
That was out of pity.
It was. I felt it too.
Alrighty, it is 2025. I cannot not talk about AI, and for some reason I can't get to. Okay, it works. So I can't not talk about AI in general because, as you can see, the whole world is talking about it, and hence we as security practitioners need to talk about it as well. So with that said, and we only, for those of you who are wondering how long this is going to go, 10 more minutes. I know between drinks and ending this up in Q&A, but 10 more minutes and then we're done. So I'm going to talk about some of the main services that we're doing at Accorian on the AI side. We're doing everything from strategy, testing. So, you know, figuring out your AI strategy. If you're implementing AI, operationalizing it internally, if you're using a third party, if you're building your own LLMs, how do you do it securely? Figuring out the architecture with you, reviewing it from a security standpoint, figuring out how does data get ingested, how does it come out, like they say garbage in, garbage out, figuring that out, access controls and the likes of that. So AI strategy is something that we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot of AI risk assessment, which is figuring out how does AI bring about new risks and threats in your organization. You know, back when some of us started our careers, data was still on-prem networks, and then we went to the cloud, and after this now data is all over with AI, right? So how does one control that, and how do you figure out what are the new risks and threats that have been introduced for your organization by virtue of the type of business that you do, right? Setting up your AI security governance practice, doing a lot of threat modeling. We're doing a ton of red teaming assessments for AI systems because it's a new paradigm, right? How can someone who's either a motivated attacker get to a particular outcome, whether it's poisoning your entire data that's going into your AI feed, or understanding how can they somehow create a new foothold, or how can they get access to a certain type of data through your chatbot, right? All of that is happening. So we're doing a ton of that. We're doing a ton of TPRM associated to AI. As you can imagine, most companies today are not building their LLMs. They're using a third-party solution. They're buying a third-party tool, or they're just creating a wrapper around, you know, one of the popular tools. How do you figure out what are the risks? How are you ensuring that they are not learning from your data, that they're not exfiltrating some of that data, right? Because as you know, data is your most important resource. So we're working on some of that, and we of course audit and assurance is a big facet of it, which is a great segue to my next slide, which is how do you figure out what are the right standards one has to adopt. So it boils down to what is your AI implementation, whether you've built your own LLM, whether you've created your AI capability using a wrapper, right? The likes of that. What kind of industries do you work with? If you're in a very, very regulated industry like health, or if you're in B2C, very different type of standards to look at. What is your inherent risk, right, as an organization also, right? Are you just a staffing company? Are you someone who's doing analytics, for example, right? If you're doing analytics, a lot more threat, right? So your inherent risk is higher. And what are your client assurance needs basis who you work with? If you work with fintechs, you're working with BFSI. If you're working with health, suddenly your customers require a lot more assurance to be showcased. So some common standards in this is, of course, AI. Like Sean said, HITRUST has two assessments or two types of assessments associated with HITRUST. It has its own certification program, which is about 44 controls, and the other one is it has its own risk management framework on which you can get an assessment done. ISO 42001, which is the pioneer in AI security. That's a very, very popular standard. We're seeing a lot of our customers adopt it, and we're working with a lot of them. There's another new standard, which is 28349. There are other standards in the 42001 family, 42005, lots of them that are suddenly becoming very, very popular. The 28349 is more associated with AI risk, right? That's a mouthful. And then comes the NIST AI RMF. The adoption of NIST AI RMF in the US has suddenly shot up and is very, very popular with organizations that are building their own LLMs and or who have to showcase to their state, local, or educational institutions what their AI security posture is. It's become an extremely very, very, very important standard there. There are other US state AI regulations also. Colorado has its own, New York has its own, and that's fast building up. And the last is the OWASP Top 10, which is in case you're building your own LLM, good luck. But if you're building your own LLM, it's very important to ensure that it's secure the ground up. So holistically, from a recommendation standpoint, if you're looking at something that could be overarching, the NIST AI RMF, great standard to look at. If you're looking at from a certification and assurance standpoint, the ISO 42001 is global. It also looks at every facet associated with your AI adoption, including people, policies, procedures, your entire governance structure. And the last one is high trust. If you are in US Health or you have clients in US Health, the high trust AI certification is a great fit. Right? I'm going to start on this. I'm going to talk about our GRC platform real quick. So Gorico was built out about 2.5 years ago, 3 years give or take. And we built it because of 4 main reasons. One is we wanted to reduce audit fatigue, those bubbles just came out, right? And risk. Second is what we started to see is a lot of GRC programs lack collaboration. The third is GRC in general, or security folks like were getting away with a lot of complicated jargons. Hence the attempt of our GRC tool was to simplify and enable adoption. So that's what we focused on. And the fourth was tracking of evidence. Each one of us who's been in an audit, everybody in this room, knows how hard it is to go get evidence from each other. So the tool enables some of that evidence collection through integrations and of course a lot of tracking with internal stakeholders. Hence at any given time you can understand what is your current posture at from a evidence collection standpoint. It's modularized, so it has multiple modules, everything from how do you adopt a new standard to how do you get audited against it to vendor risk to policy procedure development to risk assessment, the entire gamut, right? What's important and interesting is, yes, there are 200 GRC platforms out there in the market, right? But this solution is something that is purpose-driven and homegrown for the simple reason that we take your GRC program and translate it onto the tool. The tool does not have to, you don't have to bend towards the tool. It's quite the opposite way. We look at a GRC program, which may be very complex, which may have its own controls and that you have created, or you may have rolled out your own integrated compliance framework. We help translate some of that and make it more effective for you so that you get value day one. I have some fun screenshots here. This is a screenshot of one of our prepared dashboards. I don't know if you can see it. With tracking, these are some policy procedures which you can create in a do-it-yourself way by answering some simple questions. Can you do it for high trust R2? Unfortunately, you can't. It's a lot more complex, but simpler ones like HIPAA, SOC 2, NIST, ISO, very well covered. We also have screenshots of how the overall monitoring of your GRC program can happen so that any CISO in your company can get a holistic understanding of what your risk and your compliance is at. There are some more screenshots about vendor risk. I think this is an extremely popular module of ours, and we're seeing a massive uptick in TPRM as the biggest driver of security spend today. We see customers, I know Rishabh spoke about BitSide, we're seeing customers adopt everything from simple attack surface management tools all the way to assessments to third party, even red teaming of their critical vendors. So I see an entire massive disruption happening in the space. With that, I want to leave you with this thought, right? That compliance is great, but compliance is not security, right? And as a company at Accorian, we're always trying to focus on moving the needle towards true security, right? With that thought, I'm going to open it up for questions.
Thank you.
Anyway. Questions? That seems forceful.
You know what? I don't like you people anymore.
Alrighty. So, firstly, thank you so much for staying on and being patient and listening to everything the team had to share. High trust is just one facet of what we do, but happy to answer questions across the entire gamut of security. I have all our leaders in this room who can answer anything in security, so the floor is yours. And I'm going to pass on the mic so that everybody can hear questions as they are asked. Please.
See, the scoping, you talk about systems and platforms, right? So we are into medical coding business, and whatever people access, right, all those things are in client environment. We log in through VPN and access it. So what kind of systems and platform will be covered as a scope?
So I just had the conversation a little while ago with somebody else, and we're working with a client. We actually went back to High Trust specifically for this medical coding approach, and what we're able to do is certify service providers by creating the environment just around your endpoints that access the client environments. So we can scope it to be just those endpoints, even if it's going into a cloud base. Just do the laptops, just do the endpoints that they're accessing. If you say you got if it's a little bit more robust, and maybe you got like a VMI or something that they're going into first, we can do it up to that point. But High Trust says we can actually create your scope or your castle walls that I talk about just around the endpoints that your people use to access your client environments.
Okay. So that will be our endpoint.
Yeah.
So in this case, now as an office, we have the employees' data as well, right? Especially with respect to HR. Will that be also a part of this high trust scope, or high trust will ask only for the client related data?
It will ask for some HR information because some of the controls, depending on if we're going E1, I1, or R2, and I would recommend probably starting with an E1. We would look at, from an evidence perspective, we would look at like background checks. We would look at, hiring practices and things along those lines. We could include the HR data as protected data and include that in scope, and whatever systems maintain that, include that as part of it as well.
So if HR data will also be a part of the scope, then the IT infra, the cloud service that we use to store our own information will also fall under the scope of trust, right?
Yes, we could. If we include that data, wherever that data lives, if we say that's protected data, we want to include that, wherever it lives and whatever touches it will then be in scope as well. Yep.
So I'm just going to add to that question. So this employee data could be India or the US, right? And
Yes.
US employee data can be classified as PHI.
Yes.
So in that particular case, how do they segregate? Because
This is Indian data.
okay, Indian data.
It's Indian data, but I know where you're going with this, and you just said it. We would identify the segregation.
Yeah.
We would break up. We would look at the network.
About what that is.
Sure. So I was just alluding to the fact that your employee base could be everywhere, right? Employees of US, their data has identifiers that are similar to or is basically going to fall under the realm of electronic health records or PHI, right? So if you have Indian employee data, that can be carved out or segregated, and the US employee data falls under the scope of high trust, and that's how you segregate the two, rather than having the lift of securing everybody, right?
Yeah.
So,
But with your scenario, we would exclude it unless you wanted to include it.
Understood.
If you wanted to expand it to include that data, yes, that's fine. If not, we'll just do the endpoints and what you're accessing the client data with.
yeah, and that's a great question. Scoping is something that we spend a lot of time on when it comes to high trust assessments, because it can be very complex. Today, most modern organizations have very complex environments, VDI environments, employees all over the world, the various data being stored. We've had cases wherein customers only want one process to be certified. They don't want the rest of the company, where the laundry is not so good, to be looked at, right? So sometimes you have to look at, holistically what's right for the customer while looking at what the standard also requires. Because the standard will tell you that to go beyond, just a process as an environment, right? In some cases.
And we can do again, we can get very creative with this. We have a very large blue customer we work with who has us do separate E1s on different portals within the organization. So, because they want to run them their own differently, they're run differently, so they don't want them all together. Similar backend, similar data systems, and there's an R2 that supports, you know, that foundational piece of it, but the portals themselves have their own E1 assessment separately.
Yeah. So we have a customer, for example, just adding to what Sean said, they do 18 high trust assessments, right, as an organization. Some of them are E1, some of them are I1, some of them are R2, all different, right? Just from a process and what their customers require. They're segregated. If you're a large BP or a large contact center or a large services company, you have different processes and teams. They have sliced and diced everything based on what their customers require and what the MSA from the customer says. So people have doing all sorts of things. Just because it says high trust, that does not mean the entire organization is de facto certified. So you can slice and dice it the way you
And trust me, we argue with them. I want to consolidate a few.
Yeah.
In a different,
Yeah.
that is a third company.
Yeah.
Let's assume that we have only two different processes and we want to slice it. The budget will be into 2 ways or it will remain the same?
Great question.
That's a sales conversation.
So, high trust MyCSF, the cost will go up because then your licensing model changes. You go into a professional license, right? Or enterprise.
So we could do, so a professional license gets you 2 objects.
Yeah, 2 objects.
So what I would sit there and say is we would be very creative with it. Use a professional license, which right now with a plan runs about 18,100 US. Before the report credits, another 4 or 5,000, whatever it is. So anyway, we would use one object for one and another object for the other. And it gets a little problematic when we get down the road because we need another object at some point to build your next assessment with. But we can work with that when we get there. But at least starting out, we would, again, get creative with it and tell you what you need to do so that way you're getting the right product up front.
Now, will your costs go up?
Yes.
Yes. Right? Can Accorian help with some of that cost? Is it going to be a 2x? No. Right? Because it's the same as the team is working. They already understand the environment, a lot of the base controls, a lot of the commonalities between. It's not like process A can be very different from process B.
And we can do reliance on each other.
Yeah.
So if we do an E1 on one environment first, and then we get to the second one, we can, for a lot of the core common controls, we can rely on the other one with that. So it does cut down that effort, and that's where you would see some cost savings.
Right. So a lot of folks, what they do is they do a common high trust for the entire IT and infra layer, right? And they do
Reliance?
They do reliance.
They
right?
rely on, we do
Across
separate small
the
ones.
various other assessments, right? It's not inheritance, but it'll be like
Kind of like using the blue example I gave you, where we did, we have the R2 that covers the data, data system and everything in the back end with all of their cloud and everything else there. And then you have these portal pieces that are just E1s, but we rely back on that R2, so we don't have to go back and retest all the data connections and all the transactional stuff back to AWS and Azure and everything else.
awesome. Good question.
Was that just one question? It sounded like it was more than one question. Somebody else?
Anything else? Yeah.
Okay, our organization is ISO 27001:2022, CMMI Level 3, EcoVadis, HIPAA compliant, and TISAC. So when we are going to pursue for high trust E1 certification, how fast we could get the certification?
You're probably pretty quick. I mean, it's again, going through the gap is going to take about 4 or 5 weeks to get through it. I would anticipate there would be some remediation in the just with the level of the elements, but I think it would be very minor with that. So I think probably less than 2 months of remediation effort, and then and even with that, the remediation, I don't think it would require incubation because I don't think you would have to implement anything new. I think it would just be refining it down to the level. So we could probably, I would say probably 7 to 10 months.
Okay.
In that area, because, and a lot of this is going to be because your CMMI level 3, which covers your 171 and your 172. So you're going to cover the core foundational controls for just about everything from that perspective. Plus you got all the other stuff on top of it. I think it really just comes down to the flavor of the high trust controls and making sure that you have all those elements covered.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I think timeline is one thing that there's a lot of variability about, right? It completely depends on your readiness and your maturity and whether the previous auditors have done their due diligence or not, for the lack of a better phrase, right?
Yeah.
But
So, because the time is prolonging,
Yeah.
the cost is going to increase beyond the implementation side. From
Yeah.
the assessor point of view, do you charge?
No,
We're fixed.
yeah, we're fixed, right? For us,
You told one of the customers spent 3 years, where your idle time is
Yeah, that sucked.
15 months.
Yeah, we didn't make any money. We spent all the money long before they got there.
yeah.
Yeah, trust me, we tried everything we could to rewrite the SOW.
See, but that's the incentive, right, of working with a company like ours, where we're trying to fix bit the cost and make the cost more predictable for the customer. Also incentivize them for good behavior, which is trying to get done as soon as possible. That's where the project management layer comes into play, which orchestrates and manages the entire effort, making sure the customer is making progress. If you're not, then they will remind you that you're not, right? So,
And we do have guardrails in our SOW now.
so
That will never happen again.
a bunch of things that we've learned over time and we've picked up on.
See, beyond lethargic way, genuinely there are some scenarios where it's prolonging for XYZ factors. According to that, it should not increase the cost. That's what I understand.
Ideally, no, right? But if the customer has put a delay or they have said, hey, let's put a pause on the project, then there is some amount of element of cost because we have to get up and get started again, right? We just can't, like the team has to be ready to go, right? So like a retainer of sort. And these are guardrails that we call out in the SOW.
Most of the impact we see is resources, like either they have a plan accordingly for resources or they lose resources during the process. And that tends to cause delays. Usually the remediation effort, and like I said, that one client was not, I won't say a one-off, but a rarity that it took them that long to remediate. But for the most part, it's usually a resource base, a commitment base by the organization. Focus has changed, and they want to put it on the back burner for a while, and that does happen occasionally. But for the most part, we don't really see any other delays. Other than when we do get to the validation piece of it, the evidence collection is, as you can imagine, pretty hot and heavy. That can be very tedious, and that can cause, if you can't meet the timeline of giving us all the evidence when we need it, we try to work with you as much as we can, but you may incur additional costs there for, if you already have an assessment, you may have to do a bridge assessment and pay an additional fee on that. If it's something brand new, it's not going to cost more, but we can't miss the deadline and submit after the fact, because then you fall out of compliance and your certification is no longer good. So there's some caveats with that there. We try our best to make sure you guys are fully aware of it. We want to avoid additional costs as much as possible.
So I have one last question. What is the tool you suggest? Is it going to be a our choice, or you recommend some tools to be followed for a better understanding process?
So just a question for everybody so that they know. The question was, what tool should one adopt? Right?
Yeah.
So, and I'll take that and Sean can partake after that, which is the tools aren't important, the process is what's important, right?
I understand. So
Yeah.
the process is main.
Yes.
This is just a projector or a presenter to make your life easier, right?
Correct.
So do you suggest anything, because as a newcomer, for an existing people, this are that they will make it.
Yeah.
But somebody's getting started with a journey.
Yeah.
So or which tool would be a right way according to the
So it completely depends on if you want to do it yourself. Do you want to?
let me make it simple. Whether the high trust or Accorian recommend any tool is my simple answer.
HighTrust has my CSF. They're like, this is our audit workbench, for the lack of a better phrase, right? All the controls are available. They will tell you use that, right? There are some modern GRC tools that talk about, hey, you can possibly achieve HighTrust using them.
The reason I have already as a company, I may be using some XYZ tool. I'm already having a bunch of security frameworks and the
Yes.
compliance certificates.
Yes.
So if I wanted to go for a high trust, how much I'm already there,
Yeah.
how much I'm yet to travel.
Yeah.
right? So the integration will be a challenge for any newcomer, right? That perspective I'm asking, because somebody's looking at high trust, they will not be directly jumping, right? They have to start from the ISO.
No, for sure, 100%, right?
They will be having existing setup. They
Yeah.
cannot reinvent everything
So,
from the scratch.
If you're already, and we'll break it up into parts, if you already have a relationship, say like with Avanta, Drata, somebody like that, fine, great, it works, we can work with them. That really is not really gonna cause any issue. We're not gonna inhibit your current processes you have with maintaining any of the other frameworks you have there. Like I said earlier, those tools aren't gonna help us a whole lot when it comes to high trust just because of the evidence collection and the timeline process. So we're not really, it doesn't really matter from that perspective, their tool, our tool, it doesn't matter. If you don't have a tool, I'll be honest with you, I would say don't get a tool, wait until you do the assessment. Let's do it without a tool. And this way it's gonna make it a lot easier because you're not gonna be bound to their guidelines and you're not gonna be fighting the square peg round hole situation where you're gonna be like, how do I make high trust work in this? I've already put a whole bunch of brain power towards how to make it work and it doesn't. So don't go get a tool until after we do the assessment and we figure out what else the tool would benefit you from. Because high trust is only gonna really, in your GRC journey, is only gonna be about this much coverage. If you're doing SOC, you're doing ISO, you're doing other frameworks, you got P&P management, you need sustenance, controls, you need TPRM. Great, let's go talk about all that with good tools that do that. Like I said, we have ours, but in a lot of cases, clients don't take our tool, they use other tools because they have other needs.
Because somebody starting as a fresh, it's easy. We are already, you know how long it takes for an adoption, right?
Yeah.
And maintaining two different tools or multiple tools or multiple frameworks will be a challenge from the organization point of view and the maintenance point of view.
Well, we wouldn't have you do multiples. Like I said, High Trust has MyCSF. You have to use MyCSF, and it's like I said, it's not a GRC tool. It's a compliance. It's a validation tool for their assessment. We don't require any other tools from that, other than your security tools that you have to have. But yeah, from a GRC perspective, if you haven't gotten it, I would say don't. If you're going down the High Trust path, let's wait and see where you go. If you have one, then we'll just work around it.
But like he was mentioning, like the big players, Rata, Venta, audit boards, NGRC, hypercompliant, they all have the readily available out-of-the-box connector for high trust as well.
Yeah.
Which you can leverage it. So
yes and no. I'm gonna add to that question. Don't drink the Kool-Aid that a GRC platform is trying to sell you on, right? And that's why I didn't want to name anybody. But now that the names have been broached upon, I will take a stab at that, right? Just because a tool says that they can automate high trust, we all know the reality of that they absolutely cannot. High trust requires a lot more to be done as compared to a SOC or an ISO, right?
There is no connector from any GRC tool to MyCSF.
So
correct. No, I agree. What I meant was, at least if they are doing already the other compliances, ISO SOC 2 typically, at least it provides a lot of breadth in terms of giving the mapping assessment that you are already there.
So that's what I was trying to get to, which is essentially when you start a scoping and gap assessment, we are consuming a lot of information about your GRC program. We're not trying to start day zero, right? Because it's going to be a waste of time. If you have a SOC, if you have an ISO, there will be a process wherein we're going to try and figure out what are delta controls and questions we should be asking for. Because otherwise it's going to be repetitive for you. It's going to be 60 interviews, it's not going to be fun for you because you've already answered those questions. In a lot of cases, we're consuming old audit evidence. We're consuming other audit reports to understand what is your current posture at. And that becomes a starting point. And then we go through whatever is the delta controls or questions that we need to understand that you have in place. And that's how we'll minimize scope, right? Now, high trust is also variable, right? Yes, E1 has 44, yes, I1 has 182, but most of our customers are doing R2s. R2 is variable, like Adarsh and Sushil spoke about. You can have anywhere between 250 to 2,000 different controls. Mapping them out is near impossible in some cases. So we mapped out 300 base controls. We know what they expect. We know what the delta between an ISO is, what a SOC 2 is, and that's what we go after. Now, how does Accorian figure out? For a lot of our customers, year one of effort, some cases for high trust, is a separate program in adoption, but after that we're trying to consolidate as much as we can, right? We're trying to do more consolidated audits, whether it's with high trust, SOC 2, HIPAA, ISO all together. Because audit fatigue is real, nobody enjoys this. And it's all about how do we use the same set of evidence to audit across many, right? Is it a little bit of a more lift during those 3-4 months? Absolutely, for the GRC team, but the rest of the year you can focus on other real security things, right? Beyond compliance.
And we want you to be smart with the evidence collection process that you're doing for all the frameworks. Because again, we've mentioned that the peculiar evidence collection processes for high trust. We have to collect evidence within a 90-day window. It's got to, depending on what its frequency is, it's got to be within a certain time period. So just because you collected all your evidence for your SOC 3 months ago, none of that evidence is, unless it's a quarterly, monthly, quarterly, or an annual, we can use for high trust. We got to collect all brand new anyway. And that's why I was saying the other side of that coin is we want to time these, collect all that evidence for high trust, and then let's use it for SOC and ISO because it then covers those after the fact. Everything for high trust can be used in every other assessment. Nothing, or almost nothing in any other assessment can be used for high trust.
High trust audits.
High trust audits. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just hard to get that mindset going.
No, I'm good.
Very good. Okay.
Can we totally bypass the expenses related to HIPAA if at all we are going to write this?
You can.
From an audit perspective, it's like.
You can. We can do it without HIPAA. And in many cases we do. We will do a HIPAA risk assessment if you have any requirements, for HIPAA compliance. You don't have to include those controls in your assessment. It's a convenience thing.
So can expenses for HIPAA?
Yeah.
So two parts to it, right? And I'll answer that question. Can you cannibalize some of the cost associated with HIPAA that you're spending currently for assessment, right? It completely depends on if your customers want you to give a HIPAA assessment report. A lot of customers today are saying HIPAA/high trust, right? So you can forego doing a HIPAA assessment if you're already doing a high trust assessment. But there's some customers who will still say, I want HIPAA compliance. You got to show it to me. And if you're a business associate, you anyways have to showcase HIPAA compliance. So most of our customers, either they add their factors into their high trust assessment, or they do a SOC 2 plus HIPAA report, and they do it both together. Right? So
Yeah, high trust and HIPAA are not the same. High trust E1 I1 does not give you HIPAA compliance.
And that's the big problem with the compliance, the GRC space also, because there's so many different compliance standards. Customers want you to, your various gamuts of customers want you to comply and showcase assurance across all of them.
And one of the things with, it's not completed yet, it's one of the considerations with the new version 12 with the addition of the new privacy domains is to answer that specific question. Why is high trust not HIPAA compliant? And I think that's where we're going to go with it.
Which is, can high trust just completely eliminate?
And we used to do it for SOC. Those who are from the old school of high trust, if you did an R2, you automatically got a SOC 2 type 2.
That was version 9.
So not 8 or 9.
Yeah,
8 or 9.
that was a good time.
Yeah, it was a good time back then. It was so much easier back then. And then SOC came out with the financial controls.
Yeah.
You had mentioned about some OHIP like similar to HIPAA.
So OHIP is a New York State specific standard, and it applies for any organization doing business directly in the state of New York with either the PCA or PHS or one of like the HIEs or the Department of Health entities within New York. You have to be OHIP compliant.
So is it similar to HIPAA wherein if we are going to access any data for a person who is residing in New York, then it applies?
No, you have to look at who you're working with in that, and are they falling under OHIP compliance rules from the New York DOH. It's very similar to like a CMS standard requirement. Kind of what it's almost identical to CMS. They just took the Fed CMS controls and made them New York controls. But yeah, I check with whoever whoever you're working with in New York, and if they have to do OHIP compliance, then chances are you're going to have to do OHIP compliance. And
Yeah,
we're working with numerous companies right now that are falling into that realm.
Yeah, it's a significant
It's a big lift.
It's a massive lift. It's much more than high trust.
More than it.
Yeah,
Right.
oh yes.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's by itself, it's 812 controls.
So if you don't need to do it, don't even think.
Yeah, try to talk your way out of it as much as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work, call me. I know all the people in New York. We'll get you out.
Yeah. Yes.
It's, and you have to second guess the business you're getting from them because it's probably going to cost you all that money.
Typically in India, like, only talking about the healthcare and life sciences sector, it is like, widely spread. What do I mean by that is like, there are medical institutes, then there are like, the research labs available for the clinical trials. There are your, the hospitals and those people. Then you have your entire medical sales representative cycle. All of these are connected to your general insurance, health insurance, medical insurance, which again go back to your TPAs, third-party administrators as the aggregators, and then these people have the end ecosystem as your pathologist, radiologist, and all of those people. And data are like here in India at least, with all due respect to our own country, though I am proud Indian, data is in a free form factor right now. Though DPDPA, we are going to be tomorrow celebrating second anniversary of the Assented Act, not being yet implemented. So how do you see like R2 is just talking about the third party. It's nowhere still having the adoption of using the word supply chain, and it's not even yet about the fourth party or the nth party. So where do you see,
It is now.
where are we going to be like
So one of the things, and Addie was talking about earlier, I mentioned it, this emphasis on TPRM, they're covering everybody. It's gotten to the point where all the major providers are pushing down, and they're literally putting mandates out. You will not, you or a sub to a sub or whoever, you cannot touch our data unless everybody in the entire line meets these standards. And they're putting the standards out, and in many cases, it's high trust. Because again, most of the breaches we're seeing are coming through third parties. They're not coming to the major carriers anymore. They're good. The major carriers aren't getting it. I mean, after the change nightmare, I think we won't see another major carrier breached at that nature. What we will see is the small app guy who's doing one little minor thing. He didn't have anything in there. They were able to get in and then get into the major system, and that'll be ugly. But they are. That is literally what the TPRM
let me give
approach
you an
is.
example. Let's say suppose I am in Apollo hospital, okay. I have my own application, but at the same time, whom I am associated with will have their own set of applications like MediAssist and those, right? Those are getting developed by TCS of the worlds and the Infosys of the worlds.
Mm-hmm.
If they people are not practicing the standards, like sir was mentioning classic example, like they simply connect through VDI. They are like we are connecting through VDI. We don't even want to go for high trust, even for our endpoints, for that matter of fact. However, we as the Apollo systems hospitals are going to be ensuring that whom we are partnering as the MediAssist, where they are leveraging the software services from, are they going to be securely procuring those software services at their end or not? So where to draw that fine balance, up to what extent of the degree should we dwelling down?
So that's why I think PCI, High Trust, CMMC did it right. They all try to become a trickle-down effect. If you are anybody, like Sean was saying, in the ecosystem, you will have to comply by it. So if I have an application developer, outsourcing company that I'm working with, I want them to meet high trust requirements, and then I start calling out that, hey, you got to ensure that your vendors are high trust certified. It's a trickle down effect. Now, will it be done in day one? No way, right? High trust has taken almost 2 decades, to get it across. Earlier, it was a very large companies that are being asked to go get a high trust. Today, like Sean was saying, startups and smaller companies, the stringent measures on them is much more than a larger company. If you're a startup or you're someone who's sub 200, 300 employees and you work in US health, you will definitely have to get a high trust. Whereas as compared to a much larger company, which could then still say that, hey, I'm getting to it, or it's in my horizon, right? Larger companies are getting it, smaller companies have to meet it. So I'm seeing that change, right? And CISOs are pushing that charter because third party, fourth party risk, massive things where everybody's talking about it. Contracts are now calling out penalties de facto in them associated to, if your third party gets breached and my data gets out, then you're liable. So that's how they're maintaining that trickle down effect.
And I know for a fact, Infosys, Comsys, and a few others, some of the really big guys, they're HITRUST certified. All their U.S. healthcare touches are all HITRUST certified. So, and their Infosys has been told they're pushing all their third parties. So all these little sub companies right here that are doing all that development for them are going to have to go through, if not HITRUST, they're going through SOC standards just to do development. They're going in and checking whether or not they're following OWASP standards from development. They're making sure they got their code reviews and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So my point was like from reliance and inheritance standpoint, if the company, like what he said, like just connecting via the VDI, if they are doing their ISOs and the SOC, are they okay to rely upon at least? Oh.
That's a big question. That's opening up a new can of worms, which is my $2,000 SOC 2 good or not? Right?
I understand.
So you know where I'm going. But that's the thing, right? That's where companies have to audit their important, critical, and their high risk vendors, right? That's the only way to know. Because can you have full reliance on something that's very open-ended? Not right.
Well, and we're also seeing, I think we went through a phase, and we've talked about this, where, we had this watering down of SOC 2 and ISO, because it was price driven. And it was pretty much anybody in the world would give you one, if, for like the $2,000 or whatever. What was it worth it? Did they actually, are you secure by doing that? And I think what we're learning here is on the tail end of that, the last couple of years of numerous organizations, going to the bottom of the pricing barrel just to get the business. It's now cost these companies significantly, and we're starting to see the after effect of you went cheap and it blew up on you. And then we're also finding companies, that are still, saying, well, maybe I can do this on my own, or I don't have to go down this path. You're not going to be able to do this on your own. And the other thing, be aware of the fakes. We know for a fact, there's an investigation going on right now with this company out of London that was selling $6,000 HITRUST certificates here in India.
With surveillance audit.
Yeah.
Which does not exist.
Didn't exist.
So
I don't know why I didn't think of that. I could have retired by now.
So CISO, like JPMC CISO put out a great paper on this I think in April or May, just around the time of RSA, talking about third party and fourth party risk, right? And that's the big thing that everybody is kind of talking about how do I ensure reliance and assurance the right way, right? And how do so I know software reports that are being looked at again. Who's the assessors being looked at? If you're a small mom and pop SOC 2 firm, then questions are being raised, right? So we're seeing that shift because at the end of the day, if a breach happens, no one's going to be like this SOC 2 auditor, this PCI auditor, this ISO auditor is assessed. Everybody's going to be like, this company's data got breached, right, by their vendor. And then, the fallout after that. Right? Now CISOs, as you know, Uber was the first case, but now CISOs are directly liable. And that's starting to happen in India as well. But CISOs are directly liable to the security of the company, where it's a criminal proceeding now. If you've signed off saying that this is good, then you're liable then. Right? So change is going to happen, it's just going to take time.
That's a government debate altogether. Why would CISO sign off?
Yeah, why would CISOs? Yeah, true. I mean, in some cases,
CISO should actually.
The CEO should take the fall for it. I agree, right? That's what happened with Uber's case, where the CISO was incriminated as compared to the CEO who was aware of it. But anyways, all right. Any other questions, folks? Great, awesome. So thank you all for coming. We have networking drinks downstairs. I'm thirsty. I'm sure you are thirsty as well, right? And we have some snacks and I'm happy to answer more questions, and the entire team is here. We'd love to know more and just catch up, right, and understand what you're doing in security. Thank you all for your time.
Look for the little blue pen.
Yeah, that's the telltale.
All right, guys, I do appreciate it. Thank you very much. And,